Chapter 225. Kim Yoon tightly grasped her hand. No. I'm useful, so you can hold me hostage now. Leave the city through the west gate, quick. It's useless. Gong Yimo smiled and shook her head. She had already proven that Jin Xing did not care about Kim Yoon's life in order to catch her. Even if the west gate was filled with Kim Yoon's men, there was nothing she could do. Now that Kim Yoon was not the emperor, under the emperor's strict orders, West Gate's men would not let her leave. So if Kim Yoon followed her, he would only be hurt. How can it be useless? Kim Yoon did not know what he was holding on to. He only knew that if he let go this time, he might not be able to see her again. This is all because of my mother. I have the duty to protect you, so what if I have to sacrifice my life? Here. Suddenly, someone discovered Gong Yimo. Before they could catch their breath, Gong Yimo continued to lead Kim Yoon away. Along the way, she didn't know how many people she had killed and how many times she had escaped from danger. Kim Yoon was in charge of leading the way. He did not believe that he could not make Gong Yimo leave the city. Seeing that the west gate was getting closer and closer, Kim Yoon hurriedly moved forward, but he was blocked by layers of soldiers. Their blades were pointed at their noses. Under the emperor's orders, anyone who dares to enter the city will be killed without mercy. Kim Yoon retreated a few steps and bumped into Gong Yimo. At this time, the soldiers chasing them were almost here. If they did not leave now, they would definitely die. Let the city leader come out to see me. Kim Yoon shouted. The city leader of the West Gate was his man. He did not believe that he could not get one person to come out. Very quickly, a tall and sturdy man appeared and knelt in front of Kim Yoon. He was one of Kim Yoon's supporters, but now that Kim Yoon was not the emperor and was at odds with the emperor because of a spy from a neighboring country, unless he did not want to live, he would definitely not open the city gate. Your Highness. Kim Yoon didn't waste any time. He took 2 steps forward, grabbed him, and hurriedly said, "Open the door. I want to go out." Your Highness, turn back. She was a spy from a neighboring country. His Majesty had already given a verbal order that whoever opened the door would be implicated. We really don't dare. Hearing Kim Yoon's words, the city leader begged in a low voice. It was already a sin for him not to give the order to take them down. If he opened the door, his entire family would die. Behind him came the sound of neat footsteps. Gong Yimo's sword was still dripping blood. She glanced at the crowd. There were hundreds of people in front of her. Even if she forced her way through, she would be surrounded before she could even kill half of them. This door. It looked like she couldn't get out. Seeing that Gong Yimo was about to turn around and leave, Kim Yoon quickly grabbed her. Where are you going? Gong Yimo wiped the sweat off his forehead and smiled bitterly as he looked at the heavy spears and blades in front of the city gate. They're almost here. I can't stay here any longer. If this doesn't work, I'll think of another way. What other way was there to think of? If Gong Yimo approached the other city gates, she would be surrounded and captured alive. Gong Yimo gently shook off Kim Yoon's hand. Don't follow me anymore. You still have a bright future ahead of you. If you follow me, don't you want everything that you've worked so hard for all these years? Go back, I'm the one who held you hostage. Go back. Her eyes turned cold and she was determined not to bring Kim Yoon along anymore. The sound of the pursuers was getting closer and closer. Even Kim Yoon could hear the danger approaching. If Yimo fell into the hands of the emperor, her fate would be miserable. He couldn't go on like this. As if he had made up his mind, Kim Yoon suddenly said, "I'll open the city gate for you." Gong Yimo saw that he was going to get the key from the city leader. She quickly grabbed him and said angrily, "Are you crazy? If you open the gate, the emperor won't let you go." Jin Yun actually broke free from her grip and smiled faintly at her. Isn't it just implicating 9 generations? Father is the leader of the 9 generations. If he's not afraid, what do I have to be afraid of? No. Gong Yimo wanted to pull him away, but Kim Yoon was determined. He walked over and took the key from the neck of the city leader who was kneeling. Gong Yimo blocked him. At this moment, she couldn't care less about the Imperial Guards who were about to catch up. She forcefully pulled him away. No. I won't allow it. There must be another way, you're not allowed to do anything stupid. However, Jin Yun turned around and pulled her forward. The soldiers who had been heavily surrounded couldn't help but back away. They weren't as crazy as the Imperial Army and didn't dare to harm Jin Yun. Thus, they staggered back and opened up a path for Jin Yun. My life was given to me by you. If I let you go, I won't be able to continue living. Then, I'm not worthy of your concern. He said firmly to Gong Yimo. I didn't do all these years for nothing. Now, they just caught me off guard. When the sun rises, I have my ways. Nothing will happen. At this moment, the Imperial Guards were already a few hundred meters away. She didn't have time to run even if she wanted to. Gong Yimo gritted her teeth. While her thoughts were in a mess, she was already dragged to the city gate. After the huge key was inserted into the city gate, Kim Yoon used a lot of effort to turn on the mechanism on the city gate. The gate slowly opened. The dull sound knocked on everyone's heart. He really opened the city gate. At this moment, Gong Yimo suddenly recalled her previous life. In order to not make things difficult for her, and also to be disheartened by Yuheng, he personally opened the city gate to let her in. In the end, he was crushed to death by the Yuheng Emperor. Kim Yoon. She grabbed his arm in a panic. In her eyes, there was a panic that Kim Yoon had never seen before. I'll be fine. His heart warmed as he gently comforted her. His eyes were fixed on her. Then, he held Gong Yimo's hand and endured the pain in his heart. Heartless. He pushed her out of the gate. Kim Yoon. The city gate only opened a small crack before Kim Yoon blocked the entrance. Gong Yimo hurriedly turned around, but she couldn't see anything behind him. She could only hear the sound of approaching footsteps, horse hooves, and noise. At this moment, she seemed to hear Jin Xing's angry roar. She couldn't leave like this. Rather than letting Kim Yoon stay behind and suffer the wrath of the Yuheng Emperor, she would rather stay behind and bear the consequences of her own actions. Let's go. Kim Yoon also heard Jin Xing's voice behind him and looked at her with determination. I'll be fine. You can at least believe me this once. I am not that weak. Gong Yimo's footsteps paused as she turned around. It was as if she went back, it would be a great blow to Kim Yoon's self-esteem. Yes, he had already opened the city gate. Whether she went back or not, Kim Yoon would not be able to escape punishment. However, escaping and being caught were two different things. In her previous life, Kim Yoon's ending was still boiling in her heart. She couldn't leave. She couldn't leave. Kim Yoon saw her like this and couldn't help but laugh. The wind blew through the city gate and tore at his hair. His golden crown had fallen off at some point. He was in a sorry state, but he was still shockingly beautiful. She didn't abandon him. She never did. She had saved him many times, so this time, it was time for him to repay her. Thus, in the moment when Gong Yimo was stunned, he slammed the city gate shut without even a word of farewell. Kim Yoon. Kim Yoon. Gong Yimo panicked and reached out to hit the city gate. However, how could her strength affect the huge city gate? Jin Yun locked the door and leaned his back against the city gate. At this moment, he could clearly see Jin Xing's eyes that were about to spit fire from his horse's back. He touched the small brocade box in front of his chest and smiled bitterly. Actually, he had always wanted to ask Gong Yimo one question. That was, after you leave this time, will you still come back? Unfortunately, there was no chance. Chapter 226. The next day, Gong Yimo did not leave the city. Yesterday, the city was in an uproar, so many people did not dare to go out the next day. The streets were silent, the shops were closed, the stalls were gone and the pedestrians were pitifully few. So many people who entered the city could not understand. She had only been away for a few days, how did the city change so much? At this moment, one of the few people who had just entered the city asked in a low voice. Little brother, do you know what happened? Why is there no one in the city? This was under the emperor's rule. Gong Yimo looked at the person behind her and shook her head, I'm not sure either. She was not sure what happened yesterday. At this moment, she disguised herself as a young man and easily sneaked into the city. Looking at the quiet streets, she frowned and casually found a place to stay. Very quickly, a few days passed. In these few days, Gong Yimo heard a lot of news. For example, Kim Yoon was demoted and the imperial concubine pleaded for mercy. For example, the Empress Dowager intervened and reprimanded the imperial concubine. For example, an assassin suddenly appeared in the palace, the imperial concubine was injured and the emperor was assassinated, causing his illness to relapse. Gong Yimo had always known that Jin Xing's illness was strange and now it seemed even more suspicious. At this moment, she was drinking tea in a tea house. A few days had passed and because of what happened that night, the tea house was very quiet. Suddenly, a cheer came from afar. She looked out of the window and saw a man running over excitedly, shouting as he ran. The second prince has been restored. What? The voice was like a prairie fire, causing many tightly shut doors to open. That's great, I knew it. The second prince is such a good person, how could anything happen to him? I heard that there were assassins in the palace last night and the emperor is sick. This morning, many corpses were thrown out. Could this have something to do with the second prince's restoration? Otherwise, why would His Majesty be so angry and let him out so easily? Discussions were incessant, but most of them were happy that Kim Yoon had escaped. Gong Yimo finally smiled for the first time in a few days. She lowered her head and drank her tea. Originally, she was waiting to save Kim Yoon if he was in danger. Who would have thought that Kim Yoon's hard work over the past few years was not in vain? In just a few days, he had turned the tables around. She stood up, thinking that he was about to return to the prince's palace. If she went back now, she might just meet him. Just when Gong Yimo wanted to go back and have a good rest, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She heard her neighbor talking, and she happened to be talking about her. I've heard that Your Highness was punished by His Majesty because Your Highness let go of a spy from a neighboring country. Spy? Yes. She seemed to be the princess of a neighboring country. Because she has a powerful weapon, even the Emperor of Dai Yu State can't tolerate her. How can a woman be so capable? It's really too scary. Fortunately, she left. But His Highness is such a good person, how could he let a spy go? Gong Yimo looked at the person beside her. Even though they said the same thing and used the same words, Yuheng was still Yuheng. No matter how good this place was, it was still not her home. This realization made Gong Yimo unable to regain her senses for a long time. Why must she stay here? Finally, as if she had made up her mind, she looked determined and walked out. However, she wasn't going to the prince's palace. Instead, she walked out of the city. At the same time, a pale Kim Yoon pulled open the curtains of the carriage and looked outside. These few days, he didn't have a good time. It could be said that he had almost died. Although in the end, he managed to make a comeback, but the danger in this was not something that outsiders could understand. At least at that time, when he pushed Gong Yimou away, he was prepared to die. At that time, when Jin Xing saw that he had let go of Gong Yimou, he took out his horse whip and gave him a good beating. Now, his body was full of whip marks. When he was in prison, he almost died from the fever. Now, he was just slightly better. Fortunately, he had been working hard for the past few years. In the end, he was able to come out alive. Now that Jin Xing was seriously ill, Yuheng was really Kim Yoon's word. If he had known that this would happen, even if he had to bear the infamy of being unfilial, he would have done so long ago. But now, it was too late for regrets. He only hoped that Yimou would hear about his news and come back to find him. After all, there was no place for her in Daiyu State. This time, he had the ability to protect her. As long as she came back, this kind of thing would not happen again. But, where was she? When she was leaving the city, Gong Yimou looked back. She had lived in this city for almost 3 years. Speaking of which, she was a little reluctant to leave. However, she should go back. If she stayed here, she would only cause trouble for Kim Yoon. Since he was fine, she should also do her own things. After all, they were still working together, right? Gong Yimou retracted her gaze, lowered her head, and left. She never liked the restrictions of her identity, nor did she like to be controlled by others. But now, she had enough of the days of hiding her identity. At this time, she looked in the direction of Daiyu State and smiled faintly. The Chaoyang princess was her. Why couldn't she go back? Daiyu State Imperial Palace. In the study of Zhaoyang Palace, everyone was as silent as cicadas in winter, not daring to make a sound. Gong Cheng was practicing his calligraphy, but his writing was not smooth. Countless balls of paper were thrown on the ground, but no one dared to come forward to clean them up. Chang Shi looked on coldly from the side. He saw that the last stroke of a good character was not written properly. Gong Cheng's thick eyebrows furrowed. Once again, he crumpled the paper into a ball and threw it on the ground. He threw the cinnabar pen away angrily. Chang Shi quickly waved his hand and smiled. Your Highness has been writing for more than 2 hours. Take a break and drink some tea. As he spoke, he handed the tea that was always prepared in the hands of the palace servants to Gong Cheng. Gong Cheng glanced at him and took a sip of tea. As a result, it was unknown how he was angered, but he suddenly threw the teacup on the ground. Bang! All the palace servants knelt down, especially the little palace maid who had just delivered the tea. She was so scared that her face turned pale as she crawled at the feet of the emperor. Your Majesty, please spare my life. Your Majesty, please calm down. Gong Cheng sneered, calm down, calm down. You don't even know why I'm angry, so what's there to be angry about? No one dared to answer his words. Only Chang Shi sighed and waved his hand to dismiss everyone. His bold action did not anger the emperor. The palace servants looked at Chang Shi gratefully and quickly retreated. Chang Shi saw Gong Cheng sitting on the dragon throne angrily and smiled fawningly. Your Highness, are you angry with Yuheng and his gang? Gong Cheng glared at him. You know very well in your heart. Chang Shi quickly smiled apologetically and did not speak. He only needed to open his mouth and let the emperor vent his depression. He did not need to express any opinions first. That bunch of useless cowards. What's the point of bullying a child? They even sent a large number of soldiers to surround her. They even said that she was a spy from Daiyu State. Ridiculous. Is Yuheng worthy of me sending a princess as a spy? Chapter 227. Speaking of this, Changshi couldn't help but laugh. So in your majesty's heart, the princess has always been a princess. Emperor Qing directly lifted his foot and kicked him. You're getting bolder and bolder. You dare to say anything? Slap your mouth. Changshi quickly patted his face twice. Look at this slave's broken mouth. Your Majesty, please calm down. Don't lower yourself to this slave's level. Emperor Qing glared at him again, then frowned. After a long time, he sighed. That girl really can't stay idle. She turned Yuheng upside down. The Yuheng Emperor is bedridden. It seems that this regime, because of her, it will change. Changshi couldn't help but think of the little girl who always wanted to snatch the horsetail whisk from his hand when she was still young. She was delicate and smart. So many years had passed in a flash. That girl should be 17 now, right? The emperor thought the same as him, thinking of this, Immerse should also be 17 now. He narrowed his eyes and smiled. 17 is a big girl. Unfortunately, no one restrained her. She probably didn't remember that she was still a girl and wanted to marry. It was obviously a scolding, but when she said it, there was a deep sense of nostalgia. I don't know what she looks like now. Changshi smiled. The princess has looked like imperial concubine Shui since she was young. When she grows up, she will naturally be a beauty. His flattery was comfortable, making Emperor Qing very happy. But when he thought of her current situation and the turmoil in the past few years, he couldn't help but sigh. You say, they are all my children. Why are they all so different? Changshi knew that His Majesty missed the princess. Secondly, he was still sad for the 4 princes who died. Especially in the past few years, the competition between the princes became more and more obvious, so the emperor's laughter was much less than before. Your Highness, don't be sad. You still have many children. They are all very filial to you. Other than this, there was nothing else to say. The harem was fierce, but wasn't the imperial court tragic? If they died, it could only mean that their skills were not as good as others. They didn't have this blessing. However, those who were still alive still had to think on the bright side. Gongqing suddenly laughed. If that girl is by my side, not only will she not comfort me, I'm afraid she will also mutter. Making you give birth to so many children, you regret it. Gongqing imitated Gong Yimo's tone when suddenly, his face turned bitter. But, where is she now? There was no overnight enmity between father and daughter. Even if he was very angry, even if she was not his biological child, the feelings he had for her were no less than any biological child. She was so smart and cute, how could anyone not like her? How could anyone be jealous of her? How could this be? Gong Yimo touched her ears. They hadn't gone back yet. Did someone miss her? She looked up at the tall city gate in front of her and clicked her tongue. Deep in her heart, there was some nostalgia. So, she actually treated Daiyu State as her hometown. Unfortunately, she couldn't just go in like this. There were too many people in Daiyu State who knew her. Who knew if there were people who were proficient in the art of disguise? Even if she wasn't afraid of anything, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. After all, she had just caused such a big ruckus in Yuheng. Many people must have heard the news and were investigating near the city gate. She had just entered this gate, and if she revealed a slight flaw, countless people would be alerted. When that time came, don't talk about entering the palace, she might not even be able to reach the city center. Indeed, people were afraid of fame while pigs were afraid of being fat. Wait, what kind of lousy metaphor was this? Moreover, she definitely couldn't go back like this. The problem of her virginity hadn't been solved yet. Fortunately, she had done many things in the past few years, so she had a plan. Now, she only lacked a foolproof plan to gain the emperor's approval. Moreover, she couldn't give others a chance to intercept her. This was really a bit of a headache. Therefore, Gong Yimo wandered around the city gate of Daiyu State's capital a few times, but in the end, she couldn't enter. After a few days, the sun was just right. In the Qi Palace, Gong Dai seemed to sense something and looked out the window. Now that the pawn shops along the river have been taken down, the only thing left is to rebuild them into a bank. With the water from the canal, it's not hard to imagine how lucrative the profits will be. Look, there are many people who have the intention to cooperate and are lining up to visit with money. These are all silver that has been delivered to your doorstep. It would be a waste if you don't take it. Your Highness, what do you think? After Bai Xing finished speaking with a smile, he saw that Gong Dai was distracted. He was a little surprised, Your Highness. His voice made Gong Dai glance at him like lightning. Bai Xing was so shocked that he almost knelt down. Your Highness, is there something wrong? Gong Dai ignored him and only asked, how is the cooperation with Yuhing going? Gong Dai had thought of the possibility of rapid development. If he could cooperate with Yuhing's Golden Jade Bank, which was maturing day by day, and achieve the exchange of banknotes, the union of the two countries would definitely be a magnificent feat. Not only would investors flood in like water, it would also be beneficial to him. Bai Xing was a little puzzled. Your Highness, didn't you read Yuhing's secret report a few days ago? Their country has been in turmoil recently, and Second Prince Yuhing is recuperating from his injuries. I'm afraid this matter will have to be delayed. Why was the prince so distracted today? For the diligent prince, this was something that had never happened before. Gong Dai also realized that he was abnormal. That's right, he had long known that something had happened to Yuhing. Yuhing had turned the world upside down to look for that person. During that period of time, he had almost gone to Yuhing. The person they were looking for was the royal sister. But in the end, Yuhing didn't find her, so where could she have gone now? When he thought that Gong Yimo couldn't have returned to Daiyu State, it was possible that she had gone to Lu Yi or Yu Qi, which was even further away. He felt a stuffy feeling in his chest. He couldn't wait to kidnap her and bring her back. He rubbed his forehead. For some reason, his heart was even more restless. Were there any problems in the capital today? Problems? Bai Xing thought for a moment. In reply to Your Highness, there wasn't any news today. Is that so? Gong Dai's cold eyes swept out the window again. Why do you feel so restless? Bai Xing smiled. It's probably because Your Highness has been too tired recently and needs to rest more. Gong Dai didn't answer him. It seemed that he was distracted again. Bai Xing naturally didn't speak again. He waited on the side. Thanks to the princess, he was someone the princess had sent to the prince. Thus, the prince had placed him in an important position these past few years. He was also one of the few strategists who could interact with the prince like this. In front of most people, the prince had an imposing aura. He didn't need to open his mouth to make people keep quiet out of fear. But in front of these people, the prince was actually very easy to get along with, other than his cold personality. Looking at the prince's appearance, it seemed that he was missing the princess again, right? The word love was a motivating force, but wasn't it also a sharp weapon that hurt people's hearts? Just as he was about to leave silently, someone hurriedly rushed in. Watch out! He really barged in. Bai Xing turned pale with fright. Did this person not want to live anymore? Little Seven couldn't hold back his surprise and didn't care anymore. Your Highness, there was an explosion outside the city. It seems that the princess has returned. Chapter 228. Little Seven's words were like a clap of thunder, making the other two people in the room unable to regain their senses for a long time. Bai Xing dug his ears. Could he have heard wrongly? He was just about to ask Little Seven to repeat himself when he heard the sound of the door opening and His Highness disappeared. His speed was as fast as a gust of wind. Don't just stand there. It's really the princess. Isn't it said that only the princess has the ability to shake the heavens and earth? Bai Xing slapped his head fiercely. Then what are you still standing there for? Quickly bring someone to look for His Highness. With a few claps of thunder, this news seemed to have grown wings as it spread throughout the entire capital. When the emperor heard this, he sat up in surprise. But as he thought of something, he sat back down with a sullen face and snorted, since she's so capable, why did she come back? Why, she can't stay outside, so she knows to come back. What kind of place does she take Jin's palace for? Changshi didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard this. Your Majesty, why are you still talking about this at this time? Quickly bring her back is the most important thing. There are many people who are coveting the princess. The emperor snorted, isn't she very capable? She can't even enter the palace, what kind of princess is she? Yes. Changshi's face was full of smiles. The emperor's meaning was very clear. Once she entered the palace, this princess would definitely be the princess. But when the emperor was happy, naturally there would be people who were unhappy. Empress Dowager coaxed her angry niece with a helpless face. Don't worry, Imperial Grandmother will definitely avenge you. That Gong Yimo, she can forget about entering the palace. The reason why Long Han Yen could call Empress Dowager Granny was because of the Empress Dowager's honor. She doted on this niece to the bone. In just over a year's time, Long Han Yen had changed a lot. In the past she gave people the impression of a fiery little chili. Now she was gloomy and her actions were ruthless, just like Lei Feng. One touch and one's life would be broken into pieces. There wasn't anyone in the palace who wasn't afraid of her. At this moment her face was malevolent as she added, what's the use of not being able to enter the palace? I want her dead. Saying that, she raised her right hand which was missing 2 fingers, her eyes filled with hatred. Imperial Grandmother, look at my hand. The way they look at me is like looking at a cripple. It's all because of that bitch. Death is too easy for her. I want to cut off her fingers one by one and feed them to the dogs. I want to chop off her hands and feet and make her into a human swine. I want her to live a life worse than death. The Empress Dowager looked like she was having a headache. Okay, I'll do as you say. Aijia will send people to capture her and prevent her from entering the palace. At this moment, Imperial Concubine Long sneered. She was looking down on this niece of hers more and more. In addition, everything had been going wrong recently, and she was in a bad mood, so she couldn't help but mock her. What will happen to Gong Yimo? Whether or not she can enter the palace depends on His Majesty's attitude. What His Majesty thinks. Aunt, do you know? Long Shengxiang's words made the Empress Dowager pull a long face. Aijia's son can only listen to Aijia. Do you think Gong Qing is Yuqi's puppet emperor? Long Shengxiang smiled and didn't say it out loud. She also hated Gong Yimo and wanted her to die. However, she was a rational person and wouldn't say it out loud. Feng Qi Palace. The Empress was naturally very happy. She had received a lot of kindness from Gong Yimo, so there was no reason for her not to be happy. However, she thought of something and narrowed her eyes, hesitating for a moment. Water Deity asked, is your highness not happy? The Empress shook her head, this Che has yet to get married. In another 2 months, the daughter of the Su family will be removed from her clothes. This Empress is worried that her return this time will bring about unexpected changes. After all, Che is also coming back. Water Deity was stunned and comforted with a smile. It's okay. His Highness is no longer the His Highness of the past. Look at how good his reputation is among the people. He won't do such an irrational thing. I hope so. Then, she ordered, I'm afraid the journey will not be peaceful. Pass down my secret order. If it's really Gong Yimo, secretly escort her back. Otherwise, I'm worried about her being alone. Yes. Not only did the Empress Dowager send people, but the Empress also sent people. There were also many people among the princes. However, it was unknown whether they were there to pick up someone or to kill someone. The originally calm Duke Xingguo's residence also became tense. Su Miaolan's wedding dress was placed at the side. It had been embroidered long ago. Now, she only occasionally took it out to add flowers to brocade. However, after hearing the news today, she couldn't continue embroidering. Was Gong Yimo really coming back? Couldn't she die outside? Why did she come back? Su Miaolan had a deep enmity towards Gong Yimo. This enmity started when the embroidery design was stolen. Then, it became more and more intense after the Tea Party incident. She thought that such a traitor who fled the country would never appear again. She didn't expect her to have the face to come back. It was really infuriating. She angrily slammed the table and thought fiercely in her heart, it's okay. Even if she came back this time and regained her status as a princess, she was still the crown princess. What was there to be afraid of? However, deep in her heart, she still hoped. Weren't there so many people who wanted to snatch Gong Yimo? It would be great if she couldn't enter the palace. It was just a few claps of thunder, but everyone confirmed the identity of the person who came. They acted immediately upon hearing the news. Of course, there were also those who were unsure and held on to a sliver of hope. Gong Dai was the former. He wasn't sure. Was it really his royal sister who came back? She had already thought of a way to solve the problem and came back. Gong Dai felt his heart beating fast and then slow down. He hoped that the person who came back was really her. But he was also afraid that it wasn't her. He had experienced this feeling of worrying about personal gains and losses too many times. Gong Yimo sat on a big rock outside the city and ate some snacks. There were people all around her. The snacks were also brought by them. Not only that, there were also drinks and dishes. Unlike those in the palace, these people really liked her and were also looking forward to her return. Their eyes were full of eagerness as they looked at her. This made Gong Yimo, who was thick-skinned, feel a little embarrassed. She was surrounded by a large group of people. Even the soldiers guarding the city were dumbfounded. This was the capital's east gate. It was also the biggest gate with the most traffic. The people entering and exiting all surrounded Gong Yimo when they saw her. If this continued, it would cause congestion. Princess. You're really back. Back then, we knew that you were so powerful that you would come back one day. A little scholar said foolishly. He looked at Gong Yimo with eyes full of longing. That's right, that's right. Princess, it's good that you're back. Daiyu State is your home. Look at you, you've lost weight in the past few years. A middle-aged woman said with heartache. She didn't lose weight. She just lost some of her baby fat. She really didn't lose weight. Princess, you're so beautiful. You must be the most beautiful woman in the world. Since you're back, don't leave again. If any bad people bully you again, we'll protect you. Yes. We'll support you. Chapter 229. Gong Yimo's heart was moved. She really didn't expect herself to be so popular. She felt ashamed. She was the one who had forgotten what she had done. Her few simple changes had greatly improved the quality of life of the common people. Coupled with the publicity of the students, her ups and downs, and her fearless spirit. It could be said that she was the undisputed star of this era. Her influence was huge. Under the flattery of the crowd, Gong Yimo was so proud that she almost forgot herself. Why didn't she realize that she had the potential to be a star in the past? Just as she was feeling proud, the chattering crowd around her suddenly quietened down. She raised her head in bewilderment, only to see a young man dressed in black, standing there quietly. He was panting slightly, quietly, looking at her. Gong Dai. The moment Gong Yimo saw him, she felt her heart beat a few times. Because he had already grown up, Gong Dai was good-looking. Gong Yimo already knew that in her previous life. But the him in front of her was even more attractive than in her previous life. In this life, his eyes were not as dark and distorted as in her previous life. Instead, they were cold and clear. It was just that they were too black and white. His emotions could be easily expressed through those beautiful eyes, making it impossible for Gong Yimo to avoid them. His beauty was impactful. His personality was impactful. But his emotions were as gentle as water. Just by looking at that person, it was as if he wanted to drown that person. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Gong Yimo suddenly felt a little hot. Wasn't it winter? What, was spring coming? But the reason why the common people quietened down was different from her. Gong Dai's fame was no less than Gong Yimo's. The difference was that Gong Yimo was loved and respected. Gong Dai was feared. In just a few short years, the number of people who had died in the market was equivalent to the number of people who had died in the past 100 years. And during every execution, the prisoners would loudly curse Gong Dai's name. So his reputation was very loud. Even the common people knew his name, not the ninth prince or Prince Chi. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo. Nothing else was important. It was as if she was the only person left in the world. She really came back. He walked towards Gong Yimo, and with every step he took, it felt like he was stepping on the tip of his heart. The commoners spontaneously retreated and quickly opened up a path, allowing Gong Dai to smoothly walk to Gong Yimo's side. Because she was sitting on a huge rock, he looked up at her and couldn't help but reveal a smile. It was really her. Gong Yimo was in a daze. His smile was like snow melting, like clouds rolling in the blue sky, clean and clear. So she stared blankly at him, who was so close to her. She didn't know why, but she didn't know what to do. Was this a conditioned reflex caused by the previous events? Her dazed look put Gong Dai in a good mood. He smiled and said, "Royal sister." He called her in a low voice, so cold and gentle, as if she had never left. Gong Yimo continued to be in a daze. Her snow-white little face revealed such an adorable expression. Gong Dai couldn't help but want to hug her in his arms and rub her. He held back his thoughts and smiled as he opened his arms to her. He said in a low voice, "I'll carry you down." When Gong Yimo heard him say that he wanted to carry her, she forgot to resist. She actually reached out her hands and was carried down by him. The faint scent of peppermint wafted over. Gong Yimo then realized that it was really Gong Dai who had come. And his arms were extremely strong. His entire body was filled with power and deterrence. He had grown up. She could no longer treat him like a child. With this thought, Gong Yimo felt her heart skip a beat. The early winter sun shone on the two extremely dazzling figures. Gong Ju subconsciously wanted to hug Emo, while Gong Emo subconsciously stretched out her hand. The moment their hands overlapped, the sun behind them was enveloped in their embrace, emitting a bright light. They were clearly one righteous and one evil, but they were extremely harmonious. They were so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off them. Many people unconsciously cried out in surprise. They had never seen such a gentle side to Gong Dai. Gong Dai had always given people the impression that he was cruel, cold, heartless, and decisive. Wherever he appeared, if it wasn't confiscated, it was exterminated. It was really hard to believe that such a person could be so amiable and approachable. Were they mistaken? This person wasn't Gong Dai or Prince Chi, but someone who looked similar. The cries of the commoners brought Gong Yimo back to her senses. She gently pushed Gong Dai away and stood still. At this moment, she was stuck between Gong Dai and the huge rock. This distance was really confusing. So she moved a little to the side, and then a little more. She lowered her head and said, "Many thanks, Imperial Brother." She emphasized these two words, causing many people to wake up. They almost forgot that the cold-blooded and ruthless Prince Chi was the younger brother that the princess had taken care of since she was young. No wonder the two of them had such a good relationship. When they saw that Gong Dai didn't bring a single attendant, they were obviously in a hurry. They were even more envious of their relationship and were less afraid of Gong Dai. After all, when they really interacted with him, he looked very easygoing. Gong Dai's lips curled up. He was very tolerant of Gong Yimo's little tricks. He took Gong Yimo's hand, just like how an older brother would hold his younger sister. "Let's go and see Imperial Father." Most importantly, they were so relaxed and natural that no one felt that it was out of place. Only then did the commoners remember that Gong Yimo was going to enter the palace. So they cheered happily. "The princess is going to return to the palace. The princess is going to return to the palace." This sentence spread by word of mouth and flew through the streets, causing countless responses and joy. Gong Dai was annoyed that he had left so quickly that he didn't even prepare a carriage. Who knew that the commoners were so enthusiastic? They actually drove a handcart that was usually used to transport flowers. At the front, there were two horses running side by side. At the back, there was a flat roof with parallel boards. There were only handrails that were half a person's height. It was very simple and crude. Gong Yimo naturally didn't want to leave and there was a carriage to sit in. So she lifted her skirt and wanted to get on, but was stopped by Gong Dai. He glanced coldly at the flower carriage. "How can this kind of carriage be worthy of you?" He said it as a statement. This carriage wasn't worthy of her at all. "Wait a little longer. My men will be here soon." Who knew that Gong Yimo wouldn't mind and waved her hand. "It's fine. The flat roof is airy and fun. I haven't sat in this before." As she said that, she jumped onto the carriage. Seeing that the princess really got on his family's flower carriage, the owner felt that her presence had brought light to his humble dwelling. He would never wash or use this carriage again. He wanted it to be his family's heirloom. Seeing that Gong Dai didn't get on, Gong Yimo asked him curiously. Gong Dai shook his head. "You can just sit there." The royal sister had just returned to the capital. He wouldn't leave any evidence for those people to use against her. He just needed to watch over her. As he said that, Gong Dai really crowded around the flower carriage like the other commoners and walked towards the palace step by step. Chapter 230. Both sides of the street were in an uproar. "The princess is back. The princess is back." "What? You're asking which princess? Is your brain rusty? Now that the city's sewers are everywhere, where did the clean running water come from? Where did the clean and convenient paper in everyone's hands come from? Where did the cheap and popular books come from? Who was the one who suggested building canals? Who was the one who improved the farming tools during the construction of canals? Who was the one who suggested the irrigation canals? Who was the one who allowed Dayu State to have good weather and rare natural disasters? It was all because of the princess. How could they not cheer when such a person came back? Some of the students in the school stopped studying and ran out of the school to watch. The scene of Gong Yimo faking her death 3 years ago was still vivid in their minds. The whole city was in tears at the princess's death. How many eulogies and eulogies had they written? How long had they mourned for? In the end, the princess managed to survive. Before they could cheer, they heard that she was being hunted down again. A woman who did not do anything wrong had to be on the run for 3 years. How pitiful. Many people thought that she must have thought of a way to get out of the hopeless situation. They could foresee that with the princess in the capital, it would be very lively. There weren't many fruits in the winter, so many young girls threw their handkerchiefs at the flower cart to express their joy. Gong Yimo felt dizzy when she held the handkerchief. She looked up and saw a group of young girls laughing and dispersing. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she disappeared into the crowd. The rich students rode their horses at the front to spread the news. There were also some who walked in the crowd to accompany the princess. The atmosphere was high, and the enthusiasm was enough to melt ice. Someone marveled at Gong Yimo's beauty and composed a poem. He sang loudly, "There is a beautiful person whose eyebrows are like willow leaves in early spring. Her eyes contain stars. Her face is like peach blossoms in March. Her smile is like 100 flowers in a banquet. Her waist is slender and her bearing is naturally elegant. Her posture is graceful, more than the limitless sun. Her jade-like appearance is like the flower of heaven. Her face is graceful and fragrant." There wasn't a single pause in his speech, and he sang it out just like that. He was completely unaware when he was singing. He looked at Gong Yimo with an infatuated gaze. There was a fanaticism in his eyes that he didn't even realize. His voice was very loud, and Gong Yimo could hear him clearly even though the scene was so noisy. Gong Yimo was very happy to be praised like this. She looked at the little scholar and smiled. "Thank you. Your literary talent is very good. You flatter me." Her smile was too beautiful to behold. It really had the feeling of a smile like a banquet of hundreds of flowers. That scholar was stunned. He thought that she wouldn't hear it, but not only did she hear it, she even replied to him. His face flushed red and he was at a loss for what to do. He did not know how to answer Gong Yimo. At this moment, other people did not want to be outdone and started to compose poems to praise her. Hearing this, Gong Yimo's face turned red and her tail was about to stick up. However, Gong Dai was not happy. He was originally in the crowd and deliberately restrained his aura so that others would not dare to approach him. But now that he coldly looked at that scholar, the cold aura from his body exploded, causing the people around him to subconsciously move away. In an instant, it became a vacuum zone. But that scholar did not notice it. Although he suddenly felt a chill, his eyes were still staring at Gong Yimo, unable to pull away. This made Gong Dai slightly narrowed his eyes and snorted. The entire street was filled with cheering people. Bai Xing used a lot of effort to squeeze to Gong Dai's side. Sure enough, once he reached the prince's side, it was much better. There was a vacuum zone around him. Finally, he could take a breather. "Your Highness." This subordinate found out that many people have been mobilized and their target is the princess. If this continues, it will be difficult to smoothly enter the palace. "Your Highness, please give your orders. Do you see that person?" Gong Dai lightly opened his mouth. Bai Xing quickly looked over. There were many people and he did not know who Gong Dai was talking about. The blue-robed scholar. "Ah! I see him." Bai Xing rubbed his fists. "That person is an assassin. What does your Highness want to do?" Gong Dai pursed his lips and coldly said, "He doesn't look young anymore. Go and check. If he is not married, find a strong woman for him. I think the daughter of the butcher of the city's west is not bad." The daughter of the butcher of the city's west was famous for being shrewish. Although she was not bad-looking, she had caused the death of 4 of her husbands. As a result, no one dared to marry her. At that time, Bai Sheng had treated this as a joke and told Gong Dai. Bai Sheng thought that he had heard wrongly. He widened his eyes and said, "Ah." Only then did Gong Dai turn his head and coldly stare at him. That gaze made Bai Sheng's hair stand on end. "You don't understand." "I understand. I completely understand." What the hell did he understand? The villain in Bai Sheng's heart was shedding tears. He was too shocked to remember what the prince said just now. It seemed that the prince wanted to act as a matchmaker for a stranger. Could it be that today's surprise was too big and the prince also wanted to do something good to celebrate? Then the assassin sent by those people? "You lead the way and pass down my order. Anyone who blocks the way will have their entire family exterminated." Gong Dai sneered, "In the past, I turned a blind eye and let them go because they were still useful. It doesn't mean that I don't have evidence to kill them. If you dare to help the tiger do evil and fish in troubled waters, you can try." Yes. Bai Sheng was in high spirits. The prince was so domineering. "Also, tell Lo Qi to send 10,000 imperial guards to welcome them." Yes. 10,000 imperial guards. There was no need to tell the emperor. Bai Sheng was convinced from the bottom of his heart. With the prince around, there was no pressure for the princess to return to the palace. Once Gong Dai's words were heard, many people ceased their activities and bided their time. Many princes who wanted to make a move did not even have a minister to support them. They could only watch helplessly. There were also people who were bold enough to not fear Gong Dai. For example, Gong Shi and the Empress Dowager. They were in a situation where they would not rest until Gong Yimo was dead. At this moment, Gong Shi looked gloomily at the people crowding around the flower carriage to the palace. His hands were clenched tightly. It was as if he wanted to crush someone's bones. One Gong Dai was already making things difficult for them. If Gong Yimo really revived, would there be any place for him in Daiyu State? Thinking of this, the scar on his arm was aching. There was once when Gong Dai almost chopped off his arm. He must take revenge for this. Long Hanyan stood beside him with an ugly expression on her face. She and Gong Yimo were not on the same side, but they were working together now. She looked at Gong Yimo's proud face and felt resentment and jealousy. No wonder Gong Dai liked her. With her foxy appearance, she was used to seducing people. She must have taken advantage of Gong Dai when he was young to make a move on Gong Dai. How shameless. At this moment, someone gave Gong Yimo a small basket of honey-stained hawthorns. Gong Yimo was overjoyed. She placed a hawthorn in her mouth. It tasted sweet and sour, causing her to squint her eyes in happiness. Then she turned around, bent down, and reached out to deliver a hawthorn to Gong Ju's mouth. Gong Ju looked up and met her sparkling eyes. For a moment, he was addicted. "It's really delicious. Don't you want to try it?" Her hair hung down and her smile was more dazzling than the sun. Gong Dai's heart softened. He lowered his head and put the hawthorn in his mouth. Chapter 231. Traces of sweetness blossomed on the tip of his tongue. It was the taste that he hated the most, but when Gong Yimo fed it to his mouth, it made him retract his aura. He was like a tiger that had been pacified, the threat disappeared in an instant. Gong Yimo watched him eat the hawthorn and wanted to feed him another one. At this moment, she suddenly heard a noise from afar. The smile on her face disappeared and she looked indifferently in front of her. She knew that this journey would not be smooth, so she decided to keep a high profile. She did not expect that there would be people who dared to take the risk of being identified by the world to ambush her. These people were probably the legendary cannon fodder, right? The sudden appearance of a group of masked men caused the commoners to panic. Kill! They did not waste any time and wanted to rush into the crowd to kill. Their target was the commoners. If someone died, the commoners would naturally disperse and only Gong Yimo would be left. At this moment, many experts dressed as commoners suddenly appeared from the crowd. They rushed forward and fought with the masked men, protecting the commoners behind them. Gong Yimo wanted to join in the fight, but Gong Dai pulled her skirt. Although he was standing beside the horse carriage like a waiter, his noble aura made it impossible to distinguish him from a commoner. Even in a crowd, he was the most eye-catching one. Protecting his beloved in broad daylight, this feeling was really good. Don't worry, these are my men. They are enough to deal with those people. As expected, as soon as he finished speaking, the assassins sent by the other party were all slaughtered. Then, those people quickly dragged the corpses away. The entire process was silent, like puppets, fast and uniform. This was obviously Gong Dai's usual style of governance, but it was too fast. Was the other party too weak, or was Gong Dai's men too strong? Gong Yimo was convinced. Seeing that most of the commoners were still panicking, she was about to say something when Gong Dai slowly walked out and stood at the front. Next, you will follow me. His voice wasn't loud, but it clearly reached everyone's ears, making them strangely quiet down. Gong Dai glanced over the crowd at Gong Yimo. For the first time, he actually revealed a smile to the crowd. He originally had an exquisite and devilish appearance, but usually, no one dared to look directly at his face. Now, his smile was like the melting of ice and snow. It actually stunned many people, both men and women. That was why it was said that food and lust were part of human nature. In the face of beauty, it was as if nothing had happened. This calmed them down. I, Gong Dai, will escort you all to the palace gates. The journey will be dangerous, but I can handle it alone. If you don't trust me, you can retreat. If you trust me, you can go forward. He didn't say anything inspiring, he was just using himself as an example. He himself was the authority, the most terrifying person in the hearts of these commoners. Could it be that there was someone more terrifying than him? Many people looked at each other and saw the eagerness in each other's eyes. That was a prince, and he was going to escort them. For a moment, everyone was filled with lofty sentiments. We will escort the princess into the palace. Escort the princess into the palace. The crowd once again became lively. The fear from before had not dissipated, but under Gong Dai's intimidation, that fear turned into determination. The group once again moved forward. Although it wasn't as lively as before, everyone's expression was serious, as if they were completing a mission. The man at the front had a cold and calm temperament, which was the source of their courage. Protecting the commoners and inspiring them, this was originally what Gong Yimo wanted to do, but Gong Dai was one step ahead of her. Gong Yimo looked at Gong Dai's back and smiled faintly. The wind lifted his clothes. He didn't turn back, but that straight back, proud and indifferent, actually made her feel a sense of security. How many years had it been? This was the first time she felt that she was being protected. This feeling actually didn't make her resist it. Instead, she was somewhat happy. Gong Dai had really grown up. He had grown up to be able to protect her. But this road wasn't easy to walk. Not long after, someone blocked Gong Dai again. And this time, the number of people was obviously much more than the previous time. In broad daylight, one side wanted to kill people, and the other side wanted to escort people into the palace. But no one dared to intervene. From this, it could be seen that the higher-ups were in a complicated and turbulent situation regarding Gong Yimo's return. So, most people chose to be neutral and watch from the sidelines, waiting for the situation to develop. This time, there were assassins blocking the way. Although there were still people who were afraid, Gong Dai stood in front and didn't move. They were reassured and didn't move. There were even people who stared at the assassins in front, their eyes filled with disgust as if they were looking at a traitor. When the people on the other side saw Gong Dai at the front, they hesitated for a moment. Even if they hadn't experienced Gong Dai's methods, they had heard of it. Especially when they saw a narrow sword in his hand, they actually shrank back. At this time, suddenly, another group of people appeared from behind. There were quite a number of people. Gong Dai thought that they were also people who came to block the way. His eyes narrowed slightly. It was difficult for him to ensure the safety of ordinary people under a pincer attack. He didn't care, but the royal sister cared. But the second group of people were afraid of being accidentally injured and shouted from afar. "Your Highness! We are here to help on behalf of the Empress." The Empress? Gong Dai originally wanted to refuse. He didn't need anyone's help. But he glanced at Gong Yimo beside him. In order to avoid unnecessary casualties and make the royal sister unhappy, it was fine to intervene. So, he directly put away his narrow sword and said, "Many thanks." So, what was originally a confrontation between the assassins and Gong Dai suddenly became a confrontation between the assassins and the Empress's secret guards. Gong Dai was happy to be free. He led people from behind and continued forward. Seeing that the two groups of people didn't even touch the side of Gong Yimo, Gong Shi felt that he couldn't wait any longer. He wanted to catch Gong Yimo, but if he waited for those trash to create chaos, he wouldn't be able to count on them. He might as well do it himself. On the other side, Long Hanyan sneered, "It should have been like this long ago. Imperial grandmother's people aren't trash." She looked at the people below. They couldn't even beat the Empress's people. She was really disappointed. Not to mention touching a hair of Gong Yimo, even Gong Dai didn't make a move. Coming out was just a disgrace. Gong Dai also knew that the first few battles were just appetizers. The real battle was yet to come. Seeing that the imperial city was not far away, Gong Dai suddenly stopped. At this time, many people rushed out from all directions. They were all full of murderous aura. Obviously, they were all elites. Gong Dai smiled faintly. It was really a big move. When the commoners saw so many people coming out, they were a little scared. Especially when there were countless arrows on both sides of the street. And the cold arrows were aimed at them. Chapter 232. Being surrounded, only Gong Dai and Gong Yimo were able to remain calm. They looked at each other and found strength in each other's eyes. Long Hanyan, who had been hiding in the dark, saw that their hearts were connected and only felt anger burning in her. She was bitterly in love with Gong Dai, but Gong Dai did not even look at her. Instead, he was so protective of another woman. In her anger, she ignored Gong Shi's obstruction and walked out. But now that she had changed her appearance and was wrapped up tightly and had drunk medicine that made her voice hoarse, Gong Dai and Gong Yimo did not recognize who she was. Of course, it was also possible that they did not have any impression of Long Hanyan. Once she walked out, she immediately attracted everyone's attention. But her eyes were only looking at Gong Dai with resentment. And adoration. As long as I give the order, these innocent people will immediately be shot into sieves. Her gaze fell on Gong Yimo and was filled with hatred. No matter how high your martial arts are, I think you won't be able to save many people, right? Her gaze made Gong Yimo feel very uncomfortable. What do you want? Very simple. Long Hanyan sneered at Gong Yimo and her gaze became fervent. Come over here and kneel down for me. I'll explain it to you properly. Kneel down. Gong Dai laughed, "Fool's talk." His sarcasm made Long Hanyan's face turn red. "Fool's talk." She waved her hand, and on both sides of the loft, the archers on the roof all pulled their bowstrings. There was a tinge of tension in the air which made many of the commoners afraid. Gong Yimo suddenly felt that she had miscalculated. Indeed, with so many commoners protecting her, those who wanted to touch her would have to think twice. After all, if many commoners died, it would not be a private matter and the emperor would not ignore it. That was why those groups of people just wanted to kill a few to create chaos. But to meet such a deranged person who did not seem to care about anything, she was afraid that the lives of so many people present here were not in her eyes. Long Hanyan was pleased with herself. "Are you afraid now? If you're scared, then kneel down and we'll talk about the rest." She looked at Gong Yimo expectantly. Kneel down in front of her. She wanted to humiliate her properly to avenge the loss of her finger and the loss of her love. Gong Dai's narrow sword once again fell into his hand. He did not know why, but the way that woman looked at the royal sister made him want to kill someone. Gong Yimo sighed. She gently jumped off the float and walked towards Gong Dai. "Kneel." Gong Yimo looked at Gong Dai, but her words were directed at Long Hanyan. "Do you know what happened to the last person who made me kneel?" Gong Yimo's words directly provoked Long Hanyan. How could she not know how Gong Yimo had dealt with Su Miaolon? Moreover, at this moment, separated by the guards, she looked at the two of them standing together from afar, and her heart became more and more twisted. "You don't want to kneel?" "Humph. Release the arrows." She gave the order, and all the archers were ready. Gong Yimo and Gong Dai seemed to have a telepathic connection as they both moved. Gong Yimo charged directly towards Long Hanyan, while Gong Dai and the guards in the crowd jumped up. Before the rain of swords fell, they protected everyone in the middle. In an instant, the sound of clanking did not stop. The commoners were so frightened that their legs turned to jelly. They did not dare to move and were protected in the middle. Gong Yimo charged forward with her sword and was instantly surrounded by more than 10 experts. If she wanted to make a move against Long Hanyan, she would have to deal with these people first. Kill. Kill them all. Long Hanyan had initially panicked when she saw Gong Yimo's sudden attack. Now, when she saw that Gong Yimo was entangled and Gong Dai and his men were having a hard time resisting the rain of swords, she suddenly felt incomparably elated, as if she had vented her anger. "Ha! Gong Yimo, just watch as those lowly commoners die because of you. Let's see if you still have the right to be a princess who is supported by the commoners. Let's see if you still have the hearts of the people." However, she obviously misjudged Gong Ju and the strength of his elite subordinates. Just as Gong Yimo had consecutively killed 4 experts, Gong Dai did not let a single commoner get hurt. This scene made Gong Shi's eyes almost pop out from the shadows. Were they all rice buckets? How could this be? Seeing that Gong Yimo was becoming more and more proficient in killing people, rather than waiting for her to kill those people before killing her, she might as well cooperate with the others to kill Gong Yimo first. Thinking of this, Long Hanyan's eyes flashed with an ominous glint. Wielding her sword in her left hand, she charged forward. In the entanglement, although Gong Yimo was having a hard time, but because of her cultivation method, every move of hers appeared to be as smooth as flowing water. But Long Hanyan was different. She was used to using her right hand, and in order to avoid the eyes of the crowd, she trained to use her left hand. So how could she be Gong Yimo's opponent? Seeing that 2 more of the experts had fallen, Long Hanyan suddenly felt a little scared and wanted to pull away and leave. "Why don't you use your right hand? You're obviously not left-handed." Amidst the flash of the sword, Gong Yimo's voice was clearly transmitted into her ears. Long Hanyan angrily turned back. The enmity of her hand being cut off and the ridicule she had suffered for the past year had made her lose her rationality. "You're about to die and you still have so much nonsense to say. Slut. Go to hell." Saying that, she had completely forgotten her original intention of leaving and once again joined the battle. She broke through the other people's protection and charged right in front of Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo looked at her and suddenly smiled. "I know, you're not using your right hand because your right hand is crippled, right?" She leapt forward, and at the moment when Long Hanyan was stunned by her words, she actually grabbed her right hand. Then she dragged her whole body in front of her and placed the knife on her neck. To catch bandits, first catch the ringleader. With Gong Yimo having her way, the remaining 7 to 8 people indeed stopped. Even the archers did not dare to shoot. They all knew very well what kind of person Gong Yimo was. The commoners were originally hugging their heads and squatting on the ground with their eyes tightly shut. But now all their voices had stopped and they opened their eyes. The ground was littered with broken arrows and Gong Dai had been standing in front of them. He was panting slightly but his eyes were cold and resolute. Just like faith, never collapsing. "Let go of me!" Long Hanyan screamed shrilly. But because of the sword on her neck, she did not dare to act rashly. Moreover, Gong Yimo was standing behind her and no matter how hard she stared, she could not see her. "It's this resentment, I was wondering why it felt so familiar." Gong Yimo smiled and held her right hand tightly. Indeed, 2 fingers were missing. This was simply a great humiliation. Long Hanyan forcefully pulled her hand back and said angrily, "Slut! You know who I am, let go of me." "Let go of you." Gong Yimo lowered her head and whispered in her ear, "Someone who wants to kill me, the person I want to kill has fallen into my hands, why should I let you go?" That heavy murderous aura caused Long Hanyan's back to tremble. She forced herself to calm down. She did not dare. She was a region princess and this was the capital. At this moment, all of the archers raised their bows once again. So among the killers, there was someone else who could give orders. Seeing this scene, Gong Yimo tightened her grip on her sword and whispered to Long Hanyan. "Tell them to put down their bows or don't blame me for being impolite." Chapter 233. Seeing the archers set up again, not only was Gong Yimo shocked, even Long Hanyan's face changed. She originally wanted to scold Gong Shi for burning the bridge after crossing the river, but in her heart, she felt that he would definitely not dare to kill her and was only putting on an act for Gong Yimo to see, so she quickly said, "Look, they don't listen to me. If they are sensible, quickly let me go. Otherwise, at most we will die together." She spoke with determination but her palms were sweating, afraid that Gong Yimo would really kill her regardless. Gong Yimo was silent for a moment, obviously thinking. But soon after, she suddenly brought the sword close and left a bloody mark on her neck. "You are Princess Xiaoqing who is doted on by the Empress Dowager. I don't believe that that person really dares to shoot arrows. Tell them to stop." The sudden pain made Long Hanyan's arrogance dissipate by quite a bit and she was somewhat afraid. I really can't control them." It was true that she couldn't control them, but half of them were on her side. Seeing that she was not telling the truth, Gong Yimo's eyes flashed with an ominous glint and the strength in her hand increased by a bit. Long Hanyan began to wail loudly. "Put it down. Quickly put it down. Do you want to watch me die?" She shouted in panic and half of them put down their arrows while the other half did not move an inch. It was obvious that there were 2 groups of people. At this moment, on the roof, an unfamiliar voice shouted with internal energy. "Let her go and we will let you go." Hearing this voice, Gong Yimo and Gong Dai looked at each other and both felt as if they were listening to a joke. "All right. Gong Yimo said, "All right," with her mouth and smiled evilly, but her hand did not loosen. "Then I will bring Princess Xiaoqing away. When we reach the palace gates, I will definitely let her go." The other party was silent for a moment. It was obvious that they could not accept this method. Princess Xiaoqing was not a strong-willed person. If she was forced to appear in front of the emperor, who knows what would happen. Seeing that the other party was thinking, Gong Yimo did not urge them, so both sides faced each other and the atmosphere was tense. "Release the arrows." Suddenly, someone shouted. Apparently, he was certain that Gong Yimo would not dare to kill Long Hanyan. However, Gong Dai laughed. Because at the same time that they released the arrows, 10,000 Imperial Army soldiers suddenly appeared and surrounded them from all directions. Among them, there was no lack of people who were skilled in Qinggong. They directly jumped onto the roofs on both sides of the street and engaged in a chaotic battle with the archers. Thus, the rain of arrows was disrupted after just one round, allowing the sudden appearance of the Imperial Army to wipe out all of them. Gong Shi did not expect such a situation. Even Long Hanyan was shocked and angry when she saw this. "Gong Dai. Are you crazy? This was the capital. How dare you mobilize the Imperial Army without permission? Do you want to die?" She shouted. If the Imperial Guards were to come, how could they resist? Gong Dai walked step by step towards Gong Yimo. In the process, he gently glanced at her and sneered, "I brought the soldiers out for training." Coincidentally, there was an assassination attempt in the capital. Thus, I took action to quell the rebellion. What crime am I guilty of? This was the first time Long Hanyan experienced Gong Dai's ability to lie through his teeth. In a moment, she resented Gong Yimo even more. If it wasn't for her, why would Gong Dai take such a risk? Gong Shi also did not expect Gong Dai to be so daring. He risked his head to send the Imperial Army to protect him. This time, he failed again. He had already failed many times in Gong Dai's hands. Sometimes, he even thought that if it wasn't for Gong Dai being busy with the matters of the bank, if he didn't defend Gong Dai might not even care about him. Thus, he was able to strike again and again but failed again and again. This knowledge made his entire face twisted with hatred. Gong Dai. He was his nemesis. Go. He heavily ordered his men to withdraw. Long Hanyan, he actually left her behind. No, he couldn't care. That idiot had exposed himself. If he went out, he would be implicated. If he didn't go out, he would still be able to protect himself. Moreover, he didn't believe that Gong Dai would dare to kill Long Hanyan after knowing her identity. Seeing the assassins retreating and leaving the corpses of their own on the ground, the Imperial Army's numbers increased and they directly controlled the scene. Long Hanyan looked at the densely packed Imperial Army and finally felt a little afraid. Gong Shi, he actually dared to abandon her. Now, the only ones left were those few experts. They were also controlled and no one dared to resist. Gong Yimo smiled. You only know to be afraid now. Isn't it a little too late? She felt Long Hanyan's body tensing up and couldn't help but tease her. Long Hanyan swallowed her saliva. She was afraid of Gong Yimo and hated her. If she wanted to beg her for mercy, she might as well die. So her pair of eyes unconsciously looked at Gong Dai. This look, there was bitterness and resentment, but more than that, there was infatuation. Ninth brother, I beg you, let me go. I'm doing this for you. Gong Yimo felt strange. She finally understood why Long Hanyan had been shouting to kill her from the moment she knew her name. She didn't expect that it was for Gong Dai. Gong Dai was originally staring at the Imperial Army, watching them quickly clean up the corpses. When he heard her words, he was a little absent-minded. For me. He faintly glanced at her and then frowned. Do I know you? He didn't care about Long Hanyan at all. But after hearing her identity, it was impossible for him not to know her. But now that she had disguised herself, why should he admit that he knew her and leave something for the Empress Dowager to use against him? His words were like a sword that pierced her heart. It pierced Long Hanyan's heart and made it bleed. Her face turned green and her chest was violently heaving up and down. If not for the fact that she was being held hostage, she would have gone crazy. All this was because of Gong Yimo. If not for her, how would Gong Dai treat her so coldly? Was she not beautiful? Was her family background not good? If not for Gong Yimo, how would Gong Dai not see her? This slut. After seducing her own brother, she still had the face to stand here. This was the biggest joke in the world. But now she couldn't provoke Gong Yimo. What if she really killed her? She must enter the palace and seek justice from the Empress Dowager. So her expression changed a few times. She no longer begged Gong Dai, but fiercely said to Gong Yimo, I'm not afraid of you. You're just a traitorous slut. If you have the guts, let's confront in front of His Majesty. Let's see if His Majesty will punish me. Gong Yimo smiled, His Majesty will certainly not punish you. At most, it would be some harmless punishment. But, I will. She lowered her voice and sounded light, but only Long Hanyan could hear the subtle murderous intent in it. Didn't I say it before? Gong Yimo looked at her fair neck and narrowed her eyes. I said, the next time I see you, I will kill you. Chapter 234. You dare. Long Hanyan's voice changed. She finally realized that Gong Yimo was not afraid of anything. She really dared to kill her in the imperial city. Gong Dai. She panicked and suddenly called out Gong Dai's name. Her eyes were filled with pleading, she's crazy. She actually wants to kill me. Imperial grandmother will not let her off. Quickly save me. Gong Dai glanced at Gong Yimo. Although killing Long Hanyan would bring a lot of trouble, as long as it was something she wanted to do, even if it was to poke a hole in the sky, he would make it up for her. So he gave a faint smile. Royal sister, you can do whatever you want. He looked at the ground that had been completely cleaned up in front of him, as well as the stunned commoners, and suddenly felt happy. He worked so hard so that she could do whatever she wanted. Kill, then kill. He said it so casually that it made Long Hanyan unable to believe it. Her eyes were wide open as if she had thousands of words to say. But this expression became the last thing she saw. She had her throat slit by Gong Yimo's blade. She really killed her. Fresh blood spurted out and that moment of blood made the commoners panic. Earlier when they were protected by Gong Dai, they were not afraid even when there were blades. But now, seeing their beloved princess kill someone, even if the other party made the first move, they still found it hard to accept. Because in their hearts, Gong Yimo was like a bodhisattva, a good person. When Gong Yimo saw their expressions, she knew what they were thinking. But this person must be killed. She meant what she said. Moreover, she really was not a good person. She looked at the crowd and suddenly smiled. She was extremely beautiful. When that palm-sized little face smiled, it seemed as if it could emit light. After laughing, she stood on the steps and looked at the crowd below. She slightly raised her eyebrows. You. Do you think I'm scary? She asked softly. That voice was light as a feather, but it was like a sigh, floating to everyone's ears. The road to the palace is full of danger. The more I give in, the closer they come. So I'm killing the chicken to warn the monkey. Do you think I'm scary? When she asked this question, her face was expressionless, but everyone could feel her sorrow. Gong Yimo could kill people with a smile, but she was not a person who liked to kill, whether it was an enemy or an innocent person. She looked in the direction of the imperial city with an indescribable expression. Back then, when I was in the middle of it, someone tried to harm me, so I chose to avoid it. Later on, I had a weapon on me and someone tried to harm me, but I still chose to feign death and escape from death. After I was discovered, countless people chased after me, but I still chose to avoid them, and was forced to leave the country. I've been retreating and hiding, so much so that I haven't returned to my country for 3 years and concealed my identity for 3 years. Gong Yimo smiled faintly, but there was a hint of bitterness in her eyes. However, the past was not worth mentioning. She covered it up with a smile. When she opened her eyes again, there was only calmness and high spirits in her eyes. So this time, I didn't come back to escape, but to face it and solve the problem. She narrowed her eyes and smiled, sweeping her gaze across the crowd. Her expression seemed indifferent, but the words that came out of her mouth were filled with determination, like the rising sun, unstoppable. I can choose not to take revenge on those who tried to harm me, but she will be the one who gets in my way. If I, Gong Yimo, want to come back, then I must come back. After saying this, she cupped her hands and bowed deeply to the people. Today, I'm indebted to everyone's support, which has increased my confidence. Because of me, everyone has been frightened. It's my fault. If there is anyone who wants to leave now, I still thank you for coming. I can't thank you enough, please accept my bow. After the bow, she quietly looked at the crowd. Her eyes were clear, and she straightened her back, waiting for them to answer. There were many doors on the street that were opened slightly, spying on them. The fierce battle just now was ended quickly by Gong Dai, so there were not many traces left behind. At this time, an old man in the crowd said, "My son made a fortune by relying on the canal. He always says thank you, but he can't repay your kindness. Don't say that the princess provoked you first. No matter who it is, it's not your fault. I'm willing to testify for the princess and send the princess back to the palace." Another woman also said, "My hometown is flooded every year. My poor old parents would rather suffer the disaster than leave their hometown. Thanks to you, my hometown has turned from a dangerous place to a fertile one. With good weather every year, they can enjoy their old age in peace. Although I'm a woman, I'm also indomitable. I sincerely admire the princess's kindness. I only hope that the princess will be well." With someone taking the lead, many people immediately thought of Gong Yimo's good. So what if she killed people? Why couldn't the princess kill people and could only be bullied? So the crowd gradually became lively. Their eyes were fervent once again. After experiencing joy, shock, wavering, and determination, they were no longer the ordinary people who gathered together by chance. They were the real hardcore supporters of Gong Yimo. This change made Gong Yimo gratified and moved her. She couldn't help but pay her respects again. But she was surrounded by the crowd and once again invited onto the flower carriage. "Princess, let's return to the palace." It was unknown who said this. Gong Yimo's eyes flashed with a ray of light. She smiled and looked in the direction of the palace. Her eyes were clear and bright. "Okay, let's return to the palace." Following that, the common people gradually became lively. Moreover, there were constantly people joining in. They didn't forget their mission. Many of them were holding tools in their hands. For example, axes for chopping wood, hammers for forging iron, etc. In the end, the imperial guards had no choice but to retreat to the back of the procession. Because there were too many people joining in front of them. By the time they reached the palace gates, it had already turned into a large parade of tens of thousands of people. This scene of tens of thousands of people emptying the streets made the emperor unable to sit still. He wanted to issue an imperial edict to summon Gong Yimou into the palace. But when the Empress Dowager received the news of Long Hanyan's death, she was so angry that her eyes turned black. As a matter of fact, she came to the emperor to complain tearfully, asking him to punish Gong Yimou severely. She was to be beheaded at the palace gates. The emperor refused. Gong Yimou was already waiting at the palace gates. Moreover, there were so many common people watching. He couldn't possibly issue such an imperial edict. Gong Yimou calmly waited at the palace gates. Looking at the palace, her eyes flashed with a trace of nostalgia. The palace had always been a place where the common people didn't dare to come into contact with. Even when they passed by, they didn't dare to raise their heads to look inside. They were afraid that they would be treated as spies and executed. When that time came, they wouldn't even have a place to cry. But at this moment, there were many of them. Moreover, with Gong Yimou and Gong Dai around, they dared to raise their heads to look at the magnificent palace. However, they didn't know that the emperor and the Empress Dowager were quarreling fiercely inside the palace. Aija doesn't care how many people are watching outside. Gong Yimou killed Yen Er. A life for a life, it's only right and proper. Emperor, issue an imperial edict now and execute her in front of everyone. Aija wants to see who dares to stop her. At this moment, the Empress Dowager's head was tied with a piece of white cloth. It was obvious that she was very angry. But she still pestered the emperor and vowed not to give up until she achieved her goal. The emperor looked at his mother with a headache, that Long Hanyan surrounded Imo on the street and even wanted to commit murder. In the end, she was killed by Imo. She can only blame herself for being inferior. Imperial Mother, don't make trouble. I have my own ideas on this matter. You have your own ideas. The Empress Dowager sneered, your heart is already biased to the horizon. What Imo? She's just a bastard child whose father is unknown. How can her cheap life be compared to Yen Er's golden branches and jade leaves? Killing her to be buried with Yen Aija feels that it's a disgrace to Yen Er's status. Chapter 235. As she spoke, the Empress Dowager felt sad. Poor Yen lost her parents at such a young age, but she's a little arrogant. Aijia will naturally punish her. She, Gong Emo, was so bold. She actually dared to kill him. She clearly doesn't put me in her eyes. Imperial Mother. The Emperor was angry. He looked around, but fortunately, he had already dismissed his servants. Only Changshi was present. Otherwise, where would he put his face? Oh, now you feel humiliated. What did you do earlier? The Empress Dowager sneered and wiped her tears. She's just a bastard, but you treat her as your own and spoil her lawlessly. Your son even dared to mobilize the imperial army for her. You don't care about this matter. Next time, the imperial army's sword will be on your neck. Emperor. Emperor Gong's face was extremely ugly. He could understand why Gong Yimou directly killed Long Hanyan. Because as long as Long Hanyan entered the palace, she would never be punished. Secondly, this was also a signal that she was back. It was like killing the chicken to warn the monkeys. Long Hanyan was the chicken. However, he couldn't understand Gong Yimou's thoughts. He didn't know where her confidence came from, so he didn't know how to deal with it. Emperor, you're not still thinking about the matter of Lei Feng, are you? Do you think that if you coax her, she will obediently hand it over? Ha! The Empress Dowager smiled gloomily. Her red and swollen eyes were full of ridicule. A bastard is a bastard, you can't raise her well. You give up on that idea. The emperor's face was extremely ugly because of her words. But he still insisted on his idea and ignored his imperial mother. Changshi. This slave is here. Changshi quickly knelt in front of the emperor. The Empress Dowager snorted, her face was gloomy and ugly. The emperor sighed, but his decree couldn't be changed, not even the Empress Dowager. Go, summon Gong Yimo to the palace for an audience. Summon Gong Yimo to the palace for an audience. The long singing voice passed through the palace gates and reverberated in the sky. Before the eunuch arrived at the palace gates, Gong Yimo heard the voice. Therefore, she stopped talking to the people around her and shut her mouth. She looked at the tightly shut palace door and smiled. It had been 3 years. She was finally back. When the palace doors opened, it was as if something was slowly unfolding in front of Gong Yimo. She didn't understand it before, but now she did. That was a path that belonged to her, a path that was different from the rest. The people were worried about her, so she could only stop here. Gong Dai wanted to enter the palace with her, but Gong Yimo stopped him. Arrange for your subordinates to send the people back first. I'll wait for you in the palace. Gong Dai was stunned for a moment before he understood her good intentions. If the Empress Dowager was also inside, then she would see Gong Yimo first and would vent all her hatred on her. If he went in with her, then the Empress Dowager would hate him as well. It was a big crime to send troops without permission. If the Empress Dowager insisted that he was guilty, then even if he could avoid the death penalty, he would not be able to escape punishment. But, what did that matter? Gong Dai pulled on her sleeve. Bai Xing. Your Highness. Send the people back home. Bai Xing looked at Gong Yimo and nodded with a smile. I will definitely complete the mission. Gong Dai smiled at Gong Yimo. Royal sister, let's go in together. In other words, they would face it together. Gong Yimo's heart warmed and she suddenly wanted to pat his head. Okay, let's go. So Gong Yimo and Gong Dai sat in a sedan and headed towards the palace. In the sedan, Gong Yimo was not nervous at all. Instead, she was excited. Gong Dai watched Gong Yimo take out box after box, but he did not say anything. He knew very well that it would be very difficult for the royal sister to win a beautiful battle. But no matter what she wanted to do, whether she could succeed or not, he did not want to let her go this time. Gong Yimo did not notice the change in Gong Dai's eyes. After flipping for a long time, she finally found the thing she wanted to give to Gong Dai. Look! The gift I prepared for you. After not seeing each other for so long, Gong Yimo would definitely not forget his gift. Gong Dai subconsciously looked at it. It was a very beautiful narrow sword. Although it was not sharpened, the light that poured down from the top to the bottom and the hidden bronze patterns on the body showed that it was a real pure bronze treasure sword. Gong Dai's eyes lit up. He liked it very much. The sword was very light, but it was very tough. Every part of it could be said to be perfect. His fingertips gently flicked the body of the sword, making a buzzing sound. It was said that steel could be tempered into steel. This sword could not be forged without a few years of practice. Moreover, it was priceless. The royal sister. She had always been thinking about him. The sword that Gong Dai was still using was one that Gong Yimo had casually stolen from the armory in the Cold Palace. He had been using it for many years, but now, this new sword made his heart beat faster. Was this a sign that there would be a new beginning between him and the royal sister? In the sedan, the light was a little dim. The two of them sat side by side. Gong Yimo did not notice his abnormality. She hugged her face and looked at him with a smile. Do you like it? If you like it, then give it a name. This was a good thing that she had spent a lot of effort to find. Gong Dai looked at her deeply. He blinked and smiled. Let's call it Yimo. Gong Yimo blushed and glared at him. She wanted to say that he was too casual in naming it. Unexpectedly, Gong Dai threw the sword away, pressed the back of her head, and kissed her. She was kissed again. The faint scent of a man came from the tip of her nose, waking Gong Yimo up from her dream. She wanted to push him away, but she felt that Gong Dai had been holding his breath. He carefully sucked on her lips and gently nibbled on them. Her heart was beating very fast. She smiled for no reason. It had been 3 years. He had not improved at all. However, she ignored that her palms were wet with sweat. She looked away to deceive herself. Seeing her smile, Gong Dai was happy and angry. He leaned forward, pressed her against the wall of the sedan, and hugged her tightly. This time, Gong Yimo really panicked. He began to breathe. His rapid breathing made her feel numb and dizzy. It was as if she was infected. Her breathing was disrupted, and her heartbeat was disrupted. His scorching body temperature made her tense up. No, she quickly pushed Gong Dai away. Her resistance only made Gong Ju more and more obsessed. He held the back of her head and kissed her deeply. It had been too long. He had longed for her taste for too long. Gong Yimo's body was burning, but she did not know. Her eyes were wide open, as if she was out of breath. Her heart was beating faster and faster. Why was his body so hot? She tried to push him away, but she was almost scalded by his body temperature. Her hands that tried to push him away couldn't move him at all. They were soft and heavy, as if her entire body had been melted by his passion. She could not do this. Chapter 236. No. No. Gong Yimo closed her eyes and pushed him away with all her might. Although Gong Ju was gasping for breath, his eyes were still fixed on her lips. She felt her face turn red and wanted to run away from this narrow sedan chair. After being pushed away, Gong Dai did not feel disappointed because he could clearly feel that Gong Yimo had loosened up. This was better news than anything else. It made him feel like his confidence had multiplied. His eyes became more and more fiery, making the air in the sedan seem like it was going to burn. No, she could not stay here any longer. She wanted to leave. In the end, just as Gong Yimo stood up, Gong Dai grabbed her hand and pulled her forcefully onto his lap. The movement was too loud, causing the sedan to shake again. Gong Dai's low and hoarse voice threatened her by her ear. Do you want the people outside to know what we are doing? Gong Yimo's body went numb from his seductive breath. She could almost imagine the strange gazes of the people outside, so she didn't dare to move even though she was originally struggling. She obediently sat on his lap. What should she do? Why was she so terrified? She was his royal sister. Gong Yimo gritted her teeth and poked his chest with her finger. What are you trying to do? She spoke fiercely, but because she lowered her voice, she did not sound imposing at all. She was like a little kitten that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Her claws had not even grown out yet. Gong Dai felt that looking at her and hugging her like this, his heart was about to melt. Those cold eyes were no longer cold, but more like a demon, with a hint of seductive affection. Like a web, they slowly wrapped around Gong Yimo until they could not be separated anymore. Seeing Gong Dai looking at her like this, Gong Yimo avoided his gaze. For the first time, she did not dare to look into someone's eyes, so she reached out to cover his eyes and said fiercely, "Don't look anymore." Then, she moved her body that was being hugged tightly and gritted her teeth. "Let me down." Gong Dai hugged her tightly with one hand and grabbed her hand that was covering his eyes with the other. Then, without any explanation, he put her hand to his lips and licked her palm with the tip of his tongue. Gong Yimo retracted her hand as if she had been electrocuted. She kept her hands behind her back. He glared at him like a tiger eyeing its prey. You. Are you a cat? Why are you licking me? She was too embarrassed to say it out loud for fear of adding fuel to the fire. Damn it, is this road really that long? Why aren't they here yet? Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and gently licked his lower lip. This action of his was truly captivating. Gong Yimo subconsciously swallowed her saliva. It's sweet. Gong Emo looked at him with a questioning gaze. Your hand. His other hand also began to hug her, closing the distance between the two of them without any explanation. Your hand has the taste of honey-stained hawthorn on it. I like it very much. His close proximity made Gong Yimo feel like she was about to explode. Her hair was about to stand up. If you want to talk, just talk. You. Why are you so close? Sure enough, Gong Dai gently sucked on her lips again and blocked all her words in her mouth. This kind of domineering and lingering made Gong Yimo unable to do anything. Since she liked it, she would definitely have to taste it more. This road was definitely the longest road that Gong Yimo had ever walked. She resisted but was suppressed by Gong Dai shamelessly. She was worried that there were people outside and did not dare to move much. He hugged her without restraint and took whatever he wanted. He did not even allow her to resist. When she was angry, he pretended to be wronged. When she pulled a long face, he wanted to make her blush and her heart race. In the end, Gong Yimo became numb. He could do whatever he wanted. Anyway, it was not like he had never kissed her before. It was just that she would never sit in the same sedan chair as Gong Dai again. Never. Princess, Your Highness, we have arrived. This sentence was simply like the sound of nature. Gong Yimo's face was full of tears. If they did not arrive soon, her mouth would be swollen. Who knew that when she stood up, she was pulled back by Gong Dai? What are you doing? Gong Yimo widened her eyes. We have arrived. Don't mess around. Gong Dai smiled. Mess around. He wanted to, but this road was too short. He could only endure it. If you want to get off, sure. He looked at Gong Yimo and smiled. A living evildoer. As long as you give me a kiss, I will let you go. Gong Yimo looked at him and gave up. Whose family did this shameless brother belong to? Anyway, he was definitely not from her family. Quickly drag him away. Seeing that she did not move, Gong Dai's smiling eyes suddenly became sorrowful. Are you not willing? His voice suddenly became low as he smiled bitterly. He had waited for her for so long without any complaints or regrets, but he had also longed for her for so long. He longed so much that he wanted to integrate her into his bones and blood, entwined with her in life and death, never to be separated again. But she was actually still so stingy with giving him a kiss. He could see Gong Yimo's struggle, but he did it on purpose. He wanted to force her to break down her defenses step by step, force her to face his feelings and force her to accept it. He had waited for so long that his heart was aching. He was really afraid that he would not be able to control himself and do something that would hurt her. Hence, she had to give him a little response so that he could restrain himself. So that he could rely on this sweet response to continue to endure. Until she was willing. Willingly. What a beautiful word. He wanted it even in his dreams. Hence, his gaze was once again fervent as he looked at her, kiss, or not kiss. Gong Yimo bit her lower lip slightly. She felt as if she was being forced to the edge of a cliff, but someone was telling her that it was easy to go down. She just had to jump down, pay. What kind of strange analogy was she making? Wasn't it just a kiss? When she was young, she saw that he was exquisite and beautiful, so she had kissed him many times. But why did she feel so uneasy? It was as if this kiss had changed something. It was this strange sixth sense that made her hesitate and did not speak for a long time. But Gong Ju's hand was grasping her so tightly, forcing her to make a decision quickly. What should she decide? Princess. Your Highness. The eunuch in front of the sedan was puzzled. Why were the two princes still not coming down? His voice woke Gong Yimo up from her dream. Kiss it then. Anyway, now was not the time to talk about these things. She still had things to do. So, kiss it. Gong Yimo took a deep breath. Just as she was about to raise her head and kiss him, Gong Dai was one step ahead of her. He held her hair and kissed her deeply. He was too happy. That joy was overwhelming. It almost drowned him. As long as the royal sister took the initiative, it would be enough. He would do the rest and leave it all to him. Gong Yimo's hand subconsciously pressed against his chest. That heavy heartbeat made her hand numb, making her unable to exert any strength. Chapter 237. What was going on? Why did she feel that something was different? Before, Gong Dai's passion seemed to have melted her, but now, he seemed to want to swallow her whole. She was really unlucky. She was clearly stronger than him, but because of the environment, she was suppressed by him and could not resist. Thinking of this, Gong Ju angrily bit down on Gong Ju's arm. The soft and tender sensation startled her, and Gong Ju, who was about to go crazy, suddenly stopped and stared at her. His eyes were misty and sparkling, making Gong Yimo's heart suddenly jump. You bit me. She couldn't describe what she was feeling, but his words made her back tingle. What? I can't. The one I bit was you. Gong Yimo avoided the topic. My mouth is swollen from your kiss. But her words caused Gong Ju's eyes to suddenly burn with passion, and her heart skipped a beat. Just at this time, the eunuch urged again. Gong Yimo quickly pushed him away and ran out. Fresh air rushed into her lungs and Gong Yimo felt like she had come back to life. The palace servants looked at Gong Yimo strangely. Did the two of them quarrel? Why did the princess's face turn red from anger and look very unhappy? Gong Dai was still sitting in the sedan and did not show himself. Gong Yimo was a bit anxious. She didn't know what Gong Dai was thinking. She stood at the door of the sedan, not moving at all. After a while, the curtain was lifted again, and he slowly walked out. Unlike Gong Yimo's anxious appearance, Gong Dai looked the same as usual. He was still immaculately dressed and had a cold and calm appearance. But when he saw Gong Yimo, his eyes suddenly smiled. Royal sister, you didn't take anything. The box in Gong Dai's hand was the one that Gong Yimo took out when she was looking for a gift. It was very important. Gong Yimo was speechless at her own forgetfulness, but the box was in Gong Dai's hands. It was as if there were nails under her feet, and she refused to take a step forward to take it away. Gong Dai understood her thoughts very well. He didn't need her to be embarrassed at all. He stepped forward and gently placed the box in her palm. His hand conveniently held the back of Gong Yimo's hand. The moment the box was pressed against her palm, Gong Yimo's heart suddenly had a subtle feeling, but the emperor was still waiting for her, so she didn't have time to think about it. Let's go, he said in a low voice. Afraid that she would feel awkward, he walked in front of her first. The palace servant led the way at the front. The grandiose Xiaoyang Hall was fully displayed bit by bit. Gong Yimo's heart calmed down at once, with a trace of determination. There was still a tough battle ahead. She had to win beautifully. When the emperor heard that Gong Yimo had arrived, his expression turned solemn. He ignored the empress dowager's crying and went from the study to the main hall. At this time, there were many officials waiting for him in the main hall. Or rather, they were waiting for Gong Yimo. His imperial mother was getting more and more muddle-headed as she aged. Perhaps it was because everything had been smooth sailing these years that she became more and more fearless. But she didn't think about it. Gong Yimo was someone that she could bully. That child, you dared to kill someone in front of him when he was 10 years old, let alone an illegitimate royal daughter. His imperial mother still had the face to cry. Her skills were inferior, and she was looking for death if she provoked her. When they reached the main hall, the Empress Dowager followed them. The emperor didn't have the mood to care anymore. At this time, he sat upright and still. He was a little impatient to know how that child had grown up. Announcing, Gong Yimo has an audience with the emperor. Prince Chi requests an audience. Two completely different announcements rang out, causing many people to feel a trace of nervousness. Not only were the emperor and empress dowager in the magnificent main hall, there were also more than 10 officials. They had all come early in the morning to report on Gong Yimo's situation. In the end, they were left in the palace. At this time, they were all staring at the main door without blinking. She came. Two equally dazzling people walked in step by step. A man and a woman. Although they were separated by a step, they gave people a feeling of intimacy. Close, Gong Ching narrowed his eyes and looked over. Because of the backlight, when he looked at Gong Yimo, he couldn't see her face clearly. He only felt that her whole body seemed to be glowing. It wasn't until she got closer that he gradually saw her appearance. Similar, really too similar. When Gong Ching saw her, it was as if he saw Xue Fei from back then. Only, Xue Lian's eyes wouldn't be as calm and composed as her. One was as weak as water, the other was as nimble as the wind. Was she really Xue Lian's daughter? This subject, son, greets your majesty. Seeing the two bowing, Gong Ching came back to his senses. Just as he was about to speak, the Empress Dowager sitting at the side slammed the table fiercely. Someone come. Why aren't you taking this slut down? Jin wants to see who dares. Gong Ching almost subconsciously roared this sentence. The Empress Dowager was stunned and looked at him in disbelief. Gong Yimo murdered an imperial relative. What's wrong with her punishing this bastard? Her son, who had been filial to her for so many years, actually sang a different tune to her because of this matter. Naturally, no one dared to move when the emperor was angry. He looked at the Empress Dowager with a headache and said in a deep voice, "In the main hall, women are not allowed to interfere in politics." The Empress Dowager sneered, "Are we discussing politics now?" Gong Ching directly said, "Yes." He looked at Gong Yimo. At this time, after she bowed, she stood there straight and looked at him with a smile, without the slightest fear. Gong Yimo's matter is a political matter. Since he said so, the Empress Dowager couldn't say anything. Now wasn't like before in the study. There were so many ministers present. She had to give the emperor some face. However, Gong Yimo spoke. She respectfully bowed and faced the Empress Dowager. "Before we discuss business, I want to ask the Empress Dowager." She looked at the Empress Dowager's sullen face, smiled, and winked. "Did you just say that I'm a bastard? Although I'm not a princess, I'm still His Majesty's child. Are you insulting His Majesty?" The Empress Dowager was angry and sad. After hearing Gong Yimo's words, she almost exploded again. But in the end, she had to take into account so many people present. Did she dare to say what happened in the past? Looking at the emperor's suddenly gloomy face, she could only swallow her broken teeth and blood, gnashing her teeth and saying, "You heard wrong. There's no such thing. After speaking, she shut her mouth and didn't speak again. She didn't believe that, so what if Gong Yimo's tongue was like a lotus flower? It was a capital offense for her to kill a royal princess. Gong Dai's unauthorized deployment of troops was also a capital offense. She didn't believe that no matter how biased the emperor was, he could still reverse right and wrong. Therefore, under her signal, someone immediately jumped out and shouted loudly, "Your Majesty! This official has a memorial." Emperor Qing glanced at Gong Yimo. "Speak." That person was from the Ministry of Justice. Hearing this, he raised his head and looked at Gong Yimo with a very cold gaze. "This official has 3 memorials." Emperor Qing indicated that there was no harm in him speaking. First, this official wants to sue the criminal Gong Yimo for using firearms and disturbing the order of the capital. This was referring to the incident in the morning when the streets were emptied. Second, I want to sue Gong Yimo for killing royal Princess Xiaoqing. Third, I want to sue the Prince of Qi for abusing his power and deploying the imperial army without authorization. After saying clearly, he bowed to the emperor. "Your Majesty, please punish severely." Chapter 238. The emperor listened to his 3 admonitions without any expression on his face, only nodding his head. Seeing him like this, that person said unwillingly, "Your Majesty, these 3 charges are all capital crimes. I hope Your Majesty will investigate clearly." Emperor Qing glanced at him, then turned to Gong Yimo. "What do you have to say?" Gong Yimo smiled faintly. "Naturally, I have something to say." She glanced at that person with a hint of mockery. "I used firearms outside the city because there was a huge rock that was used as a rockery that was about to collapse. In order to prevent it from hitting pedestrians, I blew it up first. The commoners were grateful to me and were curious about the firearms. It's not strange that they supported me. I didn't cause any casualties, and the commoners spontaneously supported me. Naturally, I didn't disrupt the order." "Nonsense." That old official snorted disdainfully. "As for killing Imperial Princess Xiaoqing." The Empress Dowager's face was sorrowful, then filled with resentment. Gong Yimo smiled. "As for killing Imperial Princess Xiaoqing, I don't admit it. How honorable is Imperial Princess Xiaoqing? I have no enmity with her, so why would I kill her? A bunch of nonsense." The Empress Dowager couldn't bear it anymore. She gloomily glared at her. "You dare say you didn't kill anyone? You dare say Yen didn't die in your hands?" Gong Yimo looked at her and raised an eyebrow. Suddenly, she slapped her head and acted like she had a sudden realization. "Your Highness the Empress Dowager, you're not talking about the leader of that group of assassins, right?" She revealed the most innocent and surprised expression. She looked at the emperor and said, "Speaking of this, Your Majesty, you have to take care of the security in the city. Just now, on my way to the palace, I encountered several groups of assassins. I almost died." Gong Yimo glanced at Gong Dai and smiled faintly. "Fortunately, I met Prince Qi. He was in the city training the Imperial Guards and saved me. Otherwise, I would have died on the way." "Nonsense. That was Yen. You killed her with your own hands. Do you dare not admit it?" Gong Yimo's gaze suddenly fell coldly on her, and her lips curled slightly. "Oh, you're talking about the person I killed." The Empress Dowager was so angry that she sneered. "You remember now?" Gong Yimo nodded. "I remember now." She tilted her head and shrugged. "This is really a misunderstanding. How would I know that the assassin who came to kill me would be Princess Xiaoqing? Did I offend her?" The Empress Dowager slapped the armrest and said angrily, "Quibble. You clearly know that she is Yen. You even snatched her corpse. Hand it over to me. This was the most painful thing for her. The palace maids only brought the news of Long Hanyon's death, but did not bring back her body. Then, it must have fallen into the hands of Gong Yimo. Yen. Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows and glanced at Gong Dai. Gong Dai nodded, which made her smile. When that person tried to assassinate me, she didn't say that she was Princess Xiaoqing. If she did, I wouldn't dare to kill an imperial relative. When Gong Dai heard this, his eyes smiled. He asked eunuch Chang Shi to come forward and pass on a message to the emperor. Gong Yimo also raised the corner of her mouth. Besides, even Qi Wang didn't recognize Princess Xiaoqing. I'm even more wronged. Gong Dai timely said, Imperial father, the assassin's corpse is here, do you want to see it? Emperor Gong glanced at the Empress Dowager. She didn't know whether to refute or to agree. She saw someone outside carrying a shelf in, and on top of it was a stranger. The Empress Dowager hesitated, thinking that Gong Dai found the wrong person. Gong Yimo timely said, this person has an accomplice. If her accomplice didn't disregard her life and death and shot an arrow to injure people, then fled on his own, I wouldn't have killed her to vent my anger. Empress Dowager, every injustice has its perpetrator, every debt has its debtor, you found the wrong person. The Empress Dowager was stunned. As soon as she received the news of Long Hanyon's tragic death, she came to find the emperor. She didn't expect there to be such a hidden story. How dare Gongshi? Or the person on the ground is not Yen. The Empress Dowager couldn't help but look carefully. But when she saw the woman's right hand, she couldn't help but cry bitterly. It's Yen. It's really Yen. Not only did Gong Yimo cut off her fingers, but also Gong Yimo wanted her life. How dare she? But the emperor didn't recognize her. Gong Dai sneered. Imperial father, this person disguised herself to assassinate. Even if it's really Princess Xiaoqing, Gong Yimo, the ignorant are not guilty. A bunch of nonsense. The Empress Dowager suddenly shouted. She stood up and quickly walked toward Gong Yimo. You dare to say you don't know her identity? You dare to say you didn't do it on purpose? Gong Yimo. You're so ruthless. Aija wants you to pay with your life. Imperial Mother. The emperor had a headache and hurriedly sent people to hold the Empress Dowager back. The palace people hurriedly went forward to hold her back. At this time, the distance between the Empress Dowager and Gong Yimo was only 2 short steps. These 2 steps were like the boundary between ice and fire. She was so murderous, but Gong Yimo just stood there calmly and looked at her coldly, not retreating at all. Her calmness stabbed the Empress Dowager. She glared at Gong Yimo, her eyes bloodshot, as if blood was about to flow out. If she wasn't held back tightly by the palace people behind her, her 2 claw-like hands would have strangled Gong Yimo's neck. She hated it. She was clearly a lowly person, but she caused Yen's fingers to be cut off. Why couldn't she kill her? She wanted to kill her. If she killed her, would the emperor ask her to pay with her life? So she didn't have any burdens and sent her best hidden guards. But she didn't expect. The one who died was actually Yen. Why? Slut. Gong Yimo faintly raised her eyebrows. You dare to say that again? You dare to say that you don't know Yen. Seeing the Empress Dowager being pulled, looking crazy and shouting herself hoarse, Gong Yimo stood in front of her and couldn't help but smile. I really don't know who she is. She answered without any pressure, and there was even a trace of a smile in her eyes, a trace of ridicule. Then she took a step forward and lowered her voice. A person who is already dead, do I need to know? I'll tear your mouth off. The Empress Dowager suddenly broke free from the palace people and reached out to grab her, but was stopped by Gong Yimo. Gongqing angrily said. Why haven't you sent the Empress Dowager back to the palace to recuperate? Yes. How could the Empress Dowager be willing to leave? But the palace people didn't dare to disobey the emperor's orders, so the Empress Dowager lost her composure in front of everyone for the first time and was dragged away. Gong Yimo tilted her head and listened to her scolding from afar. The corners of her lips slightly hooked up, revealing a trace of a smile. In the end, everything was too smooth. Compared to Yuqi's poisonous Empress Dowager, she was much more immature. Gongqing sighed, knowing that his Empress Dowager was muddle-headed because of her grandniece's death. But in this matter, Gong Yimo wasn't to blame. He wasn't biased, he was just handling it impartially. The hall quieted down again, but the atmosphere didn't calm down because of the Empress Dowager's departure. Instead, it became more domineering. Several ministers looked at each other and saw determination in each other's eyes. At this time, another person stepped forward. It was the left Prime Minister, Imperial Concubine Long's father. He looked at Gong Yimo and coldly snorted. Your Majesty, this official also has 3 complaints. I want to sue this woman. Gong Cheng's thick eyebrows slightly tightened and glanced at Gong Yimo. Speak. Chapter 239. First, I want to sue her for not offering the treasures she has with her. She is disloyal. Gong Yimo's expression turned slightly serious. She was deep in thought and did not speak. Second, I want to sue her for faking her death to escape. She is deceiving the Emperor. Emperor Gong's expression darkened as he looked at Gong Yimo. He could still remember how sad he was at that time. However, it turned out that she had lied to him. It made him feel uncomfortable. Third, I want to sue her for colluding with Yuheng. She is suspected of treason. As he spoke, he passed on a secret letter. This letter was sent by Jinshi in Yuheng. It was also the foundation for him to regain his position. It was the trump card that Prime Minister Zhuo was so confident about. Even Gong Yimo did not expect such a thing to exist. She looked at the letter coldly and narrowed her eyes. The letter recorded every detail of Gong Yimo's life in Yuheng. She helped Yunjin to regain her position and helped Kim Yun to regain his position. The more the Emperor read, the more frightened and colder his heart became. Gong Yimo. She actually helped the prince of the neighboring country. Now that she had suddenly returned, he even wondered if all of this was a conspiracy of the neighboring country. Therefore, the joy in his heart was completely washed away by this secret report. Prime Minister Zhuo looked at Gong Yimo proudly. Originally, His Highness the Fourth Prince took action to catch Gong Yimo and get her secrets. However, since Gong Yimo was so capable, she just had to get close to the Emperor. Therefore, he had to take drastic measures to deal with her. However, he did not tell his good sister, the Empress Dowager, about this matter. The Empress Dowager had been in a high position for many years. She was obstinate and self-opinionated. She also favored her little niece. If she knew, it would only ruin things. Therefore, it was safer for him to do it himself. He wanted to see how Gong Yimo could escape this time. If he could not get it, he would use the Emperor to destroy it. After the Emperor finished reading all the secret reports, he sighed in his heart. Gong Yimo really helped the second prince of Yuheng a lot. Furthermore, the secret report had specifically stated that Gong Yimo had lived with the second prince of Yuheng, Kim Yun, for nearly 3 years. Kim Yun was also very handsome, as beautiful as pearls and jade. Gong Qing couldn't help but suspect that Gong Yimo had feelings for him. After all, Gong Yimo was already 17 years old. Moreover, after the turmoil in Yuheng, Kim Yun was secretly in power. However, Gong Yimo did not go to Yuheng. Instead, she came to the Daiyu state, which was a dangerous place for her. The reason behind this was hard to explain. Gong Cheng only felt a surge of anger in his heart, and directly threw the secret report in front of Gong Yimo. The thick and hard booklet collided with the white marble slab, and a crisp, "paw" sound was heard, causing many people's hearts to tremble. "What do you have to say?" When Gong Cheng said this, his voice was deep, and it was obvious that he was very angry. Gong Yimo slightly frowned, picked up the booklet, and read 10 lines at a glance. She found that the other party was indeed telling the truth, but the words were deliberately misleading. However, only Kim Yoon and Yoon Jin would know such details. Kim Yoon would not say anything, but Yoon Jin. Gong Yimo wanted to sigh. It was not enough that she had cheated her in Yuhing. She even went to Dai Yu State to be cheated by her. She really knows how to bear grudges. After figuring out the cause and effect, Gong Yimo sighed. "I have nothing to say." Prime Minister Zhuo was happy. Was she admitting her guilt? If these 3 crimes were confirmed, Gong Yimo would not be able to escape death. The evidence is irrefutable. I guess you have nothing to say. Prime Minister Zhuo smiled proudly, and gloomily stared at Gong Yimo. You'd better tell the truth. What benefits did Yuheng promise you? How could you abandon your home and country? What is your purpose for coming back this time? Tell me quickly. Unlike Prime Minister's was agitation. Although Gong Cheng was angry, he still had a trace of rationality. He suppressed his anger and asked, "Is everything in this booklet true?" His voice was loud and clear, and it resounded in the main hall. His eyes were fixed on Gong Yimo, and he did not want to miss any of her expressions. If it was true, even if he could not bear it, he could only put down his heart for the sake of Dai Yu State. He had to destroy all the disasters. Gong Yimo looked up at him, and her faint voice echoed in the hall. "It's true. Then why did you come back?" Gong Cheng could no longer control his anger. He waved his hand, and the booklet beside him was thrown to the ground. With his roar, all the palace officials present knelt down and kept quiet out of fear. But Gong Cheng's eyes were like lightning, shooting straight at the slender woman and narrowing his eyes. "You came back. Do you want me to kill you?" Indeed, the previous matter had not been resolved, and now she was suspected of being a traitor. Every crime was a capital offense. Did she come back to court death? Gong Yimo did not kneel down at the bottom of the stairs, and neither did Gong Dai. She could not help but glance at Gong Dai, and saw that his expression was cold and solemn. She took a deep breath and knelt down. "I came back because I know that the death penalty is unavoidable. So, I want to buy my life from your majesty." Her words left everyone scratching their heads, but for some reason, they felt flustered. Gong Cheng, who was sitting high on the dragon throne, leaned forward slightly when he heard this. "Whose life are you buying?" Gong Yimo looked up and smiled, her back straight. "Of course, it's my own life. Life can be bought." Many people looked at each other, while Prime Minister Zhuo and the others were on guard. They knew that Gong Yimo was up to something again. Buying her life. It was clearly an excuse. What did she use to buy it? What could make His Majesty pardon her 3 capital offenses? Suddenly, Prime Minister Zhuo thought of something and was shocked. Could it be that Gong Yimo could not resist the pressure and wanted to hand over the firearms? He was not the only one who thought so. Almost everyone present thought so. Thinking of how Gong Yimo smashed the door with the firearms, perhaps she had this intention from the beginning. Gong Cheng's anger was temporarily suppressed by her words. His heart was bewildered. Previously, Gong Yimo would rather die than do it, but now she was willing to do it. What was the reason? But Gong Yimo was intelligent since she was young. Her way of buying might be different from what they thought. "How do you want to buy it?" When he said this, he suddenly felt that the pressure was not enough and sneered. You have 3 death sentences on you. Gong Yimo smiled, please dismiss the attendants. Gong Dai suddenly frowned, but before he could say anything, Prime Minister Zhuo was the first to disallow it. Your Majesty, you must not. Gong Yimo has martial arts, you can't give her a chance to be alone. Perhaps this is Yuheng's conspiracy. His words made Gong Cheng's face sink, but Gong Yimo smiled. Eunuch Chang, she can stay. I am just a little girl, no matter how powerful I am, can I be stronger than the #1 master in the palace? Prime Minister Zhuo was a little flustered. Gong Yimo was full of cunning. If they all left, he was afraid that the emperor would be persuaded by Gong Yimo. If they were still here, he could guarantee that even if Gong Yimo really handed over the firearms, he could still impose the crime of treason on her. After all, it was true that she had been with the prince of the neighboring country for 3 years and did so many things for him. Perhaps the reason why she handed over the weapon now was for a bigger scheme. In short, he believed that if they were here, Gong Yimo would not be able to get away with it. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Gong Yimo is very sinister and cunning. You must not be careless. Besides, there is nothing to hide from others. Her request is obviously fishy. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Chapter 240. Naturally, Prime Minister Zhuo had the same suspicion in his heart. But when he looked at Gong Yimo kneeling below the stage with clear eyes and a proud appearance, for some reason, the anger in his heart gradually dissipated. Yes, there are indeed a lot of suspicious things about her that need to be guarded against. Moreover, as the emperor, his every move must be responsible for the people of the world. But this time, he suddenly wanted to take a risk and believe her. So after a moment of deep thought, he said in a deep voice. All of you, withdraw. Your Majesty. Prime Minister Zhuo was anxious. He didn't expect that although the emperor was suspicious, he was still willing to believe Gong Yimo for once. Prime Minister Zhuo's decision cannot be changed. He waved his hand. Everyone, withdraw outside the hall and wait for the summons. Changshi, stay here. Changshi whispered, yes. Seeing that the emperor had made up his mind and didn't even look at him, Prime Minister Zhuo couldn't help even if he was anxious. He could only angrily glare at Gong Yimo and go out with a belly full of calculations. Gong Ju was also hesitant. What was there that he couldn't know? He faintly looked at Gong Yimo, but Gong Yimo gave him a reassuring smile. He then pursed his lips and went out. In a moment, only Gong Yimo, the emperor, and Changshi were left in the magnificent hall. It seemed extremely empty. Seeing that everyone had left, Gong Yimo winked at the emperor. Can I stand up? She said this with confidence, making the emperor, who was still angry and doubtful, couldn't help but snort. She stood up by herself and went straight up the stairs to the emperor. Prime Minister Zhuo was still a little scared. He glared at her fiercely. What are you doing up here? Go down. Gong Yimo smiled obediently, but her footsteps still kept going up. Changshi suddenly flashed and stood between Prime Minister Zhuo and Gong Yimo. He sighed to her. Princess, you can't go any further. Gong Yimo looked at him and smiled. It's so tiring to look up and talk down there. It's much better now. I won't go up. Eunuch Changshi, you don't have to be nervous. Changshi took a step back. It was really just one step because Gong Yimo was now only a few steps away from the emperor. One was sitting while the other was standing. At this distance, Gong Cheng could no longer put on his high and mighty airs. She was so shameless that Gong Cheng wanted to sigh, but he held it back. He gave her a heavy look with a warning in his eyes. You said that you want to buy your life. I would like to know, how are you going to buy 3 death sentences? Hearing this, Gong Yimo leaned back on the dragon claw armrest and did not beat around the bush. She raised her eyebrows and smiled. I'm carrying a weapon, and I refuse to hand it over. Does that mean I have a rebellious heart? She shook her head. I refused to hand it over at the beginning, and I naturally refuse to hand it over now. Your Majesty should give up. Her words made Gong Cheng's expression turn cold, shattering his hope. He suddenly didn't want to continue listening to her. Because in Gong Cheng's opinion, she couldn't have anything more important than firearms. Seeing his cold expression, Gong Yimo sighed in her heart, but she continued. As for faking death to escape, deceiving the monarch, Gong Cheng looked at her. He wanted to see how she would quibble. Back then, when he was so sad, it was just her trap. Thinking about it, he got even angrier. Gong Yimo knew exactly what he was thinking. Her lips curved into a self-deprecating smile. At the beginning, Gong Dai was in danger, and I couldn't get away, so I came up with such an idea. It was very risky, just like gambling. That time, I really almost died. She said it in such a flat tone. For some reason, Gong Cheng's anger dissipated, and he even felt a little guilty. At the beginning, he was also at fault for pushing her so hard. He couldn't blame others for coming up with such a plan. As for treason, Gong Cheng suddenly looked up at her. In his opinion, this was what he cared about the most, and it was also what he suspected the most. I didn't commit treason. Kim Yoon is my friend. I was just helping him a little. Moreover, I don't think it's treason. Gong Cheng snorted. Obviously, he didn't believe her. He leaned on the dragon throne and said coldly. It's not up to you to say it's not up to you. Now, there are 3 crimes, and each of them can put you to death. Tell me, this life. How do you want to buy it? Gong Yimo naturally knew that Gong Cheng wouldn't let her go like this. If she didn't dispel the concerns in his heart, even if there were many favors, he still wouldn't let her go. So she took out a box from her arms and handed it to Changxi. Gong Cheng looked at Gong Yimo strangely. He didn't think that the things in this small box could make him let go of Gong Yimo. After opening it, he found a stack of papers. On the first drawing, there was a drawing of an exquisite armor. He couldn't take his eyes off it. He wasn't an ordinary person. Naturally, he didn't think that this was just an ordinary drawing. There was also Gong Yimo's handwriting on it. He looked at it carefully and was pleasantly surprised to find that every word was like a treasure to him. Dayu State was known as the leader of the 4 countries, but in terms of fighting strength, it couldn't compare to Lu Yi. Perhaps this was the reason why Gong Cheng had always wanted Gong Yimo's firearms. Lu Yi was brave and good at fighting. His equestrian skills were excellent, and his swordsmanship was especially superb. This made Dayu State very passive every time they fought with Lu Yi. Almost every time, they relied on numbers and financial resources to win. One could imagine how sullen it was. Light cavalry wasn't as agile as Lu Yi, and their defensive capabilities were poor. Even their horse training and crossbows couldn't compare to Lu Ye's overall ability. As for heavy cavalry, although their defensive capabilities were improved, their armor was heavy. A set of armor usually weighed 40 to 50 kilograms. With such a heavy load, they lost the mobility that cavalry should have. Not only the cavalry, but even the infantry were also very passive. Dayu State soldiers were thin and weak. They weren't as tall and strong as Lu Yi, so they could only strengthen their defense. A full set of armor and weapons weighed at least 20 kilograms. The human body was heavy, and the consumption was high. It wasn't suitable for long battles, especially in winter. Because the armor was cold, the armor in winter was like ice armor. Therefore, these were problems that had always been a headache for the emperor. However, the drawing that Gong Yimo gave him was a drawing that could improve the armor. In one fell swoop, it could improve all the problems of the armor and make it have no weaknesses. Cotton armor. It was made of silk that was repeatedly pressed and hammered to increase the density of the armor. Then, iron rivets were fastened to increase the defense. Not only that, but during winter battles, it could be poured with water to freeze it to further strengthen the defense. It was wear-resistant, light, and labor-saving. Of course, this was only the outer layer. Gong Qing saw that there was another drawing below. It was a chainmail made of countless thin chains. The design of the chainmail was also very exquisite. It was made of iron wires and iron rings that interlocked with each other. It was shaped like a net lock. Not only did it save a lot of iron materials, but it also greatly reduced the weight. Its defense was so strong that not even a crossbow could penetrate it, let alone a normal bow and arrow. Wonderful. Wonderful. Why didn't anyone think of it earlier? If it could be popularized, Dayu State's combat power would increase significantly. They would become the strongest of the 4 major countries. In Gong Cheng's opinion, this invention wasn't inferior to papermaking or printing. Chapter 241. Gong Cheng couldn't help but look at Gong Yimo. His heart was filled with surprise. However, he forcibly suppressed it. Although this armor was good, it was difficult to popularize it. Although Gong Yimo had written down the method of laminating and compressing it, it would take a long time to implement it. Moreover, the price of this set of cotton armor was more expensive than the previous iron armor. Therefore, even if he wanted to popularize it, he had to carefully consider it. After all, the canal had just been built, and the treasury was empty. This thing is very good. It's enough to buy your life. Gong Qing didn't forget what he was most worried about, and that was Gong Yimo's treason. Her motive for returning this time was indeed suspicious. After all, according to the secret report, with her friendship with Kim Yoon, she could summon the wind and summon the rain if she went to Yuhing. Why did she return? In the heart of an emperor, he wouldn't consider the sense of belonging, the state of the country, and these things. He only considered benefits, so he wanted to see Gong Yimo's sincerity. Didn't she stand here because she had a well-thought-out plan to persuade him? Gong Yimo smiled. I heard that in recent years, Gong Dai has been working hard to establish flourishing World Bank. This, presumably, was approved by Your Majesty. Gong Qing nodded. Without his support, Gong Dai would never be able to open flourishing World Bank in Dayu State, no matter how much manpower and financial resources he had. The popularity of the bank would bring many benefits. Gong Dai would earn a lot, and the amount of money he would give to Gong Qing would also be a lot. Moreover, the unification of banknotes was a symbol of a strong country. Moreover, he didn't need to put in much effort, so Gong Qing naturally supported it. Gong Yimo smiled. This bank was also my idea. As she spoke, she handed over something to Gong Qing. It was only a thin piece of paper, but when Gong Qing saw the content, he couldn't recover for a long time. When he looked at Gong Yimo again, his eyes were full of disbelief. When Gong Dai wanted to open Xingshi Bank and unify the banknotes, he heard that Yuheng was doing the same. Furthermore, it was even more impressive than Dayu State. Now that he saw this contract, what else did he not understand? The reason why Yuheng was able to do things so smoothly was because the country's upper echelons were corrupt. Thus, Kim Yoon was able to make a comeback and stand out from the crowd. He was an existence that had the final say. But more often than not, there was an expert guiding him. The person who could come up with the idea of changing the shop into a bank and unifying the banknotes was definitely an otherworldly expert. His vision and structure were not something that an ordinary person could think of. When he first heard about it, he wanted to find out who this person was. Unfortunately, Kim Yoon kept it a secret, and he was too far away to do anything about it. He didn't expect that person to be right in front of him. Furthermore, there was this contract. The contract was simple. Gong Yimou would own 10% of Kim Yoon's Golden Jade Bank. 10%. Don't underestimate this 10%. Once Golden Jade Bank reached the scale of Star City, this 10% profit would be more than the annual profit of 4 to 5 small countries combined. And Kim Yoon actually gave it to Gong Yimou. To a neighboring country's princess. This made Emperor Gong feel uncomfortable. Firstly, he suspected that there was something between Gong Yimou and Kim Yoon. Otherwise, why would he give away such an important thing so easily? Secondly, Kim Yoon, an outsider, could trust Gong Yimou so much. But as a father, he was full of suspicion and was always on guard. Thus, he didn't speak for a long time because he didn't know what to say. Gong Yimou saw the change in his expression and didn't force him. I don't know what kind of existence the bank is in your Majesty's eyes. But in my eyes, it exists and it is greater than establishing a country. This document in my hand allows me, an outsider, to become the second spokesperson of Golden Jade Bank. Moreover, Kim Yoon and I are friends. He will listen to my suggestions. Gong Yimou's eyes gradually lit up. With this, Dayu State and Yuheng can unite and unify the banknotes together. From a national perspective, I can tie Dayu State and Yuheng together. This will make Liu Ye's ambition empty and unable to realize it. From a profit point of view, the exchange of currency between the two countries is bound to break the national border and start to establish diplomatic relations and trade. In the future, many things that Yuheng has that we don't, we will have in the future. Moreover, with this contract, you don't have to worry about Yuheng betraying us one day. As long as Golden Jade Bank grows bigger, the power in my hands will also be greater. Once war breaks out, you can imagine how useful this document in my hand will be. Even if Yuheng abandons the contract, with this contract, we will be able to hold the moral high ground. Therefore, Yuheng will only want the two countries to be on good terms. He will definitely not want the two countries to be hostile. We will firmly hold the initiative. At this point, she raised her eyebrows and winked at the emperor with a smile. And I am the backbone of the two countries' diplomatic relations. Is this enough to buy my second life? If Gong Che was here, he would understand what Gong Yimou was doing. When she wanted to build the canal, she had said that one day, she would open the country's gates and let the four countries establish diplomatic relations. Kim Yoon, Gong Dai, and Shin Shiyi all knew her wish. But they would never have thought that she, who seemed to be simple-minded and unscheming, was really doing this. She might not be scheming, but her heart was filled with ravines, rivers, lakes, and seas. And now, she was using benefits to force Emperor Hongqing to open the country's gates. Let's start with Yuheng. Will he agree? Emperor Hongqing pondered for a long time. Gong Yimou seemed to have drawn a perfect blueprint, making him yearn for it, and his heart surged. But the four countries' well water did not interfere with the river water for a long time, and it had long become a fixed pattern. Now, did he want to be the first person to break the pattern? By doing so, would it bring benefits or danger? Did Gong Yimou have a conspiracy by doing this? He had to think about all these. After a long while, he tightly clenched the contract and returned it to Gong Yimou. He looked at her deeply. This point needs to be decided by the imperial court. Consider it as buying your second life. Gong Yimou's eyes curved into crescents as she smiled. Her smile was extremely beautiful, as if she was satisfied. That extremely beautiful face calmed Emperor Hongqing's originally turbulent heart. At this time, she suddenly knelt down and deeply bowed to Emperor Hongqing. Her actions, for some reason, made Emperor Hongqing's heart jump a few times. When Gong Yimo was demoted, she had knelt down to him. When he forced her to hand over the firearms on the city wall, she also knelt down before faking her death. Every time she knelt, it seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Every time she knelt, it was a profound intention and decision. But this time, what did she want to do? After Gong Yimo kowtowed, she raised her head and looked at him with firm eyes. Her voice was calm and calm. I won't buy a third life, I'll only sell myself to you, to this country. As long as you let me stay, I'm willing to be alone and never marry. Chapter 242. Her voice was clear and melodious, each word resounded in the whole. But the content of her words made Gong Qing somewhat confused. Even Chang Shi showed a look of disbelief. What did you say? Gong Yimo looked at him and once again said word by word, I can't deny the third crime. I can't deny that I have always been in Yuheng, and I can't deny that I have always been helping Kim Yoon. So you will certainly suspect me. I can't refute, and I also don't want you to believe in empty words. Therefore, I have decided not to marry for the rest of my life, and sell my body to the country. I ask your majesty, to grant me your permission. With that, she kowtowed again. The moment her forehead touched the ground, she suddenly thought of Gong Dai. Before coming in, she didn't expect that the left prime minister would have the evidence of her helping Kim Yoon in the past few years. So she was confident in her victory. But because of this sudden situation, she changed her mind at the last minute. But she didn't know why. She had already decided not to marry for the rest of her life. So why did she suddenly think of Gong Dai at this time? And why was there a trace of guilt in her heart? She didn't understand, so she might as well. So she didn't think about it anymore. After a long time, Gong Qing digested this sentence. He looked at Gong Yimo hesitantly with a complicated expression. Have you really decided not to marry for the rest of your life? Gong Yimo pursed her lips and said, Yes. Gong Qing was silent again. Gong Yimo had completely grasped his thoughts. Indeed, Gong Yimo wanted to come back. He was worried about many things. First, Gong Yimo was carrying a sharp weapon. No matter who she married, he was afraid that it would cause a national disaster. Second, Gong Yimo and Kim Yoon had a good relationship. He was also worried that one day when Kim Yoon asked for her hand in marriage, he couldn't refuse. But if Gong Yimo said that she wouldn't marry for the rest of her life, then he could explain it to anyone. Third, and most importantly, he suspected that Gong Yimo and Kim Yoon had feelings for each other. This time, her return was a conspiracy of the neighboring country. But as long as she didn't marry for the rest of her life and stayed in Dayu State for the rest of her life, what else did he have to worry about? She and Dayu State were firmly tied together, and all the problems would be easily solved. So he admired Gong Yimo. She said that she wouldn't marry for the rest of her life, but not for the rest of her life, because she couldn't marry anyone. Her actions today, from the moment she dismissed everyone, she had probably thought of what to do. First, she showed off her talent. Even if she had a gun in her hand, he could not bear to kill her. Show her capital and status, so he couldn't kill her. Thirdly, he had to express his determination and tie himself firmly to the country. Let him rely on her intelligence, put her in an important position, and never have the thought of killing her again. This step was really smart. Even if the final result was, it was cruel to her. A woman who didn't marry for the rest of her life, and was so capable, he was afraid that her life wouldn't be peaceful. She was sacrificing too much. When he was alive, he could protect her, but what about when he wasn't? If the next emperor coveted her things, what would happen if she didn't have the protection of her husband's family? So, even if he knew that this was the best solution, he still asked again. Have you really made up your mind? Gong Yimo wanted to say something, but for some reason, her heart ached. Gong Dai, who was outside the hall, stood under the glaring winter sun. He looked in the direction of the hall and frowned. Why was Royal Sister sad? I've decided. She closed her eyes and ignored everything as she said lightly. Good. Emperor Gong suddenly laughed. He laughed even louder because he was going to have a son. Gong Yimo didn't want to marry. For her future, he could only compensate her for her status, so that she would be invincible no matter when and where. Gong Yimo was full of talent, she was dedicated to serving the country. Not marrying for the rest of her life was a loss for her, but a blessing for the country. So, at this moment, he couldn't show sympathy, so he could only be happy. His hearty laughter spread outside the hall, making Gong Dai think deeply and making the officials panic. Gong Dai didn't expect that Minister Zhuo would have evidence against Royal Sister. After all, even he didn't know what happened to Royal Sister in Yuheng. Jianxi was unexpected. But when he saw the Emperor's anger, he was prepared. No matter what the result was, he wouldn't let Royal Sister get hurt, and he wouldn't let her leave. He was even prepared to be the Emperor's enemy. But now that he heard the Emperor laugh, he felt a bit uneasy. Unless his sister had done something very important, the Emperor shouldn't have forgiven his sister so easily based on Prime Minister's confident appearance. Thinking of this, he looked at Minister Zhuo indifferently. He didn't expect Minister Zhuo to be so capable. He had been busy with the bank and Zhao prison, so he didn't have anything to do with Minister Zhuo. Every time there was a conflict of interest with Gong Dai, Minister Zhuo would take the initiative to compromise, so Gong Dai didn't care too much about him. But now, Gong Dai was looking at him with murderous eyes. Minister Zhuo's expression was ugly. The Emperor laughed, which proved that Gong Yimo had succeeded. She convinced the Emperor. How did she do it? The Emperor was obviously suspicious. They didn't have to wait too long. Everyone was called into the main hall again, but this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The Emperor was happy, his face was flushed, and his eyes were full of spirit. Changxi's expression wasn't good, and he seemed to be a little surprised. He didn't know what had happened that made an old man like him lose his composure. Gong Yimo stood next to the Emperor with a smile. When she saw Gong Dai come in, she winked at him. Gong Dai felt that something was wrong, but when he saw her relaxed look, he returned a smile. He only hoped that it was really nothing. He could ask her later. Minister Zhuo looked at the Emperor and Gong Yimo's harmonious appearance. He couldn't hold it in any longer. He stepped forward and asked carefully. Your Majesty, how should we deal with this woman's 3 major crimes? Emperor Qing looked at him with some dissatisfaction. For the first time, he felt that Minister Zhuo was so insensible. What major crimes? Mo is my daughter. What crimes did she commit? Minister Zhuo turned pale with fright when he heard Emperor Chang's words. He forgot his duty and blurted out, but she is obviously suspected of treason. I said no, that means no. Minister Long, are you doubting me? Seeing Emperor Chang's sunken face, Minister Zhuo woke up from his dream. He quickly knelt down and secretly gritted his teeth. This subject doesn't dare. Only then did Gong Qing snort with satisfaction. He said coldly, I hope you all remember this. Mo is my daughter. From now on, I don't want to hear any ridiculous words about her treason. This subject obeys the Emperor's command. Many people subconsciously kowtowed and surrendered. At this time, an imperial censor felt that something was wrong and stepped forward to say, Your Majesty, a monarch's words are not a joke. You have personally demoted this woman's status. She is no longer the Chaoyang princess, so she is no longer your daughter. Chapter 243. His words made Emperor Gong's expression pause, and then he looked over even more sharply. Yes, there will no longer be a Chaoyang princess in this world. Emperor Gong pondered for a moment and said to Gong Yimo. Come forward and listen to the title. Yes. My daughter, Yimo, is bright and intelligent, brave and resourceful, devoted to the country, and her loyalty and contribution is no less than any man. From today onwards, I title you Princess Feng Gue Rongji. You will enjoy the Crown Prince's worship and live in Taiji Palace. Feng Gue Rongji. These 4 words shocked everyone present. Feng Gue Rongji, with a Feng Gue Rongji, the world is extremely glorious. From the moment they came in, they guessed that Gong Yimo would be restored, but they didn't expect it to be such a title, to enjoy the Crown Prince's worship. Could it be a female Crown Prince? Moreover, it's Taiji Palace. This honor made them unconsciously recall the scene when the emperor bestowed the title in the cold palace. This time was the same as that time, no. It was even more glorious than that time. Gong Yimo, not only did she return, but she also rose to a height that no one could reach. Gong Dai's heart was even more uneasy. There had never been a princess who could be so honored, and the more royal sister received at this time, it proved that she sacrificed more. Gong Yimo listened quietly and knelt at Emperor Gong's feet, ignoring the exclamations of everyone behind her, and kowtowed deeply. Son, receive the edict. As soon as she said those words, the way everyone looked at her was completely different. Not a commoner who betrayed the country, not a Chaoyang princess who was demoted, but Feng Gue Rongji. Even the princes who were lower in status than the crown prince had to salute her. What was a special honor? This was a special honor. Seeing her so calm, Emperor Gong nodded with satisfaction and clapped his hands with laughter. Very good. I will choose an auspicious day to worship the heavens and ancestors. The world will be pardoned, and everyone will celebrate. At this time, no one could go against Emperor Gong's words, and they all kowtowed. Thank you, Your Majesty. Your Majesty's grace will last forever. Thank you, Your Majesty. Amidst the layers of congratulations, everyone knelt down. Emperor Gong Qing personally stepped forward and helped Gong Yimo up. Together with her, he looked at His Highness and shared this honor. This was power. Once a person lives, once a person dies. Gong Yimo closed her eyes and calmed down the restlessness in her heart. She did not forget that this was only the first step. Today, these people were few, and the emperor was happy, so they naturally did not dare to refute. But tomorrow, it might not be so. She had to sit firmly in the position of princess. After everyone had left, Gong Yimo sent Gong Dai off. She was now granted a residence in the imperial palace and could not leave for the time being. Presumably, when the emperor was completely assured of her, he would grant her another residence. Anyway, she was not in a hurry. At this time, the sky was gradually darkening. Large amounts of clouds accumulated on the horizon, making it extremely dark. Gong Dai held a palace lantern and walked side by side with Gong Yimo. Royal sister, he suddenly smiled, I've always called you royal sister. I didn't expect that now, your royal sister. In the night wind, he was like a banished immortal. His appearance was exquisite, his clothes fluttered, and his eyes were as clear as black jade. Gong Yimo saw that he did not show any abnormality and could not help but ask, do you resent me? He raised his eyebrows slightly. Resent you for what? Gong Yimo bit her lower lip. Back then, in the ice river, he had personally cut his own artery and said that he wanted to cut off all ties with her. But now that she had become a princess, did he not resent her in his heart? Gong Dai immediately understood her thoughts. Silly girl. His fingertips lightly tapped Gong Yimo's forehead. This kind of disrespectful action in the past was now done with great ease. Gong Yimo angrily slapped his hand away. Impudent, she was the boss, okay. But his words were not derogatory at all. There was only a touch of warmth and sweetness. No matter who you are, no matter how I call you, in my heart, there is only one place for you. His words made Gong Yimo choke. She glanced at Gong Dai and saw that he was very serious when he said these words, as if he had confirmed it 1,000 times in his heart. She could not refute him at all. But, she could not do this. She was now Gong Dai's royal sister. As long as the emperor acknowledged her, it did not matter whether they were related by blood or not. So she gritted her teeth and said, "Do you know how I got father to acknowledge me again?" Gong Dai looked at her quietly. He was not anxious. Even if she did not say it, he would know. Gong Yimo said, "I promised him that I would never marry in this life, and that I would serve the country wholeheartedly." She looked at Gong Dai's face and said slowly in a low voice, "So, in this way, do you resent me?" After saying that, she suddenly felt like biting off her own tongue. She originally wanted to say, "So, don't waste your energy." But somehow, it became a question of whether he resented her or not. Gong Dai's expression was a little stiff at first, but when he heard the last sentence, he suddenly laughed. He reached out to touch Gong Yimo's head, but found that it felt very good to the touch. He could not help but rub it. Why was his royal sister so cute? Gong Yimo angrily hit his hand, but she did not hit him. Instead, the simple bun on her head was messed up, making her speechless. "I'm being serious here. That's what I said to the emperor." She thought that she looked very fierce. "So, don't have any other thoughts. I will not be husband and wife with anyone." "Then we won't be husband and wife," he suddenly said. "Ha!" Gong Yimo was dumbfounded. She did not expect Gong Dai to have such a reaction. At this moment, the last ray of light disappeared from the horizon. The two of them stood at the entrance of the palace. The warm palace lanterns flickered, illuminating his pair of black jade-like eyes. There was a kind of enchanting charm to them, and the slightly curved corners of his mouth seemed to be able to hook people's hearts, making her unconsciously hold her breath. He looked at her, and after a while, he said in a low voice, "From the moment I wanted to be with you, I was prepared to give up everything." His voice blended in with the wind. It was very soft, but it carried the determination after deep thought. "I know that you want to do a lot of things. You have a lot of persistence and a lot of ideas. So, I can only become as strong as possible, so that no matter how far you go, you will always be within my reach." But this goal had not been achieved yet. Perhaps Gong Yimo had grown too quickly, or perhaps he had not worked hard enough. This was the only thing that made him helpless. He could only work harder. "You have your own life. I don't want you to give it up. So, from the moment I wanted to be with you, I decided that I would give up." He said solemnly and seriously, "I won't fight with the crown prince because you are unhappy. I won't want to be the emperor because you want to go everywhere. I don't want a status, as long as, to be with you. So, it's good that you don't marry. Then, in your life, there will only be me, the only exception." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.